So the project Exchange was born from a collaboration with artist Rebecca Modrak in 2017 and used eBay as a site of artistic production and cultural exchange. So we wanted to work with the properties and functionalities of an already existing online service, one that was governed by the logic and language of commerce and interfere with them linguistically and conceptually, specifically with the idea of efficiently hunting for the best buy, which was embedded in the kind of like very foundation of eBay. The main question that we posed to the participants, which were over 90 artists, curators, and researchers, was to explore the types of encounters that could happen between an artist and a buyer or collector beyond the exchanges one is used to in an online marketplace. So for 3 months, Exchange presented one artwork as auction per day that used the eBay auction template as a tool to create a work. So the work was, what constituted the work was the title, the descriptive text, images, the price, and the sale categories. And we use it also as a format for the presentation and distribution of artworks, which at that time existed among 12 million art items sold across all of the eBay platforms. We then archived the auction on our website using the same sale categories of eBay. So the auctions were on sale on eBay for 7 days a week, and we promoted them via social media and our email out before archiving them on our website. So while the template offered the participant a predetermined format to work with, we focus on the structure offered by the platform, such as the linguistic context provided by the sale categories, from real estate to collectibles to tickets and experiences. And we also focus on the way the marketplace changed across geographical locations and the idea of the audience as a passerby. The artworks were very different in nature according to the sale category they belong to. So the item that you see in this slide, online hand choreography for hire, was presented in the category artistic services and was a choreography for computer in 23 steps by Flea Immediately. While playing with the language of commerce, the artwork explored the relationship between the body and the eBay algorithm, and it asked questions like, what new possibilities will your hands create? How will you dance the dance? Where is your dance floor? Another work that was presented as part of Exchange was an apology for sale by Ajib Badoria, Chinar Shah, and Surabhi Vaya. And it entailed the sale of a flag in the category Home Decor Sale sections of eBay. And it actually addressed a real occurrence. The tech company Amazon had to apologize to the Indian government for having sold a doormat with the Indian flag on it. On a piece of khadi cloth, often considered the symbol of nonviolent resistance by Mahatma Gandhi during India's freedom struggle, the artist printed the original apology letter that Amazon had to write to the Indian government. Another work, which is the last one I present, was the one of Joanna Mall. The auction was posted in the totally bizarre category, and it sold the Google trackers embedded in the North Korean government website at a time in which the North Korean goods were embargoed. An interesting fact about this auction is that it was blocked by Amazon because the eBay algorithm read it as an embargoed good itself. And so we showcase the blocked auction. So at the end of the project, we also created a catalog with the intent to document the project, since everything was live and every day there was a new work being presented. And this is a map of the overall transactions that happen during the project, and you can find on the cover of the book. We also commissioned essays to writers to expand on the issues raised by the project. We created postcards that went to the participants with the book. Some of the participants also got together to organize book launches in different cities, like René Carmichael and Curating YouTube at Panke Gallery in Berlin, or Gaia Tedone, who was a guest curator in Rome. So to close this introduction to the project, as Curators in Exchange, it was the platform itself, eBay, that aided the process of collaboration. And having this interface allowed us to perform different types of actions, from buying, chatting, and distributing. It also allowed us to use new forms for displaying art and generating exchanges, as well as exploring how value is associated to objects, ideas, and goods when mediated by the web services. And now I will let Gaia Tedone continue the presentation, and she will talk about her the projects that she curated for Exchange.
Thank you, Marialaura. I will take over now and share my screen. Okay. Okay, so Marialaura already provided a very clear sort of overview of the project Exchange. And I was invited by her and Rebecca to be one of the guest curators. At the time I was located in the UK, and the invitation kind of came in the middle of my PhD at the Center for the Study of the Network Image at London South Bank University. So really the premise of the project was to invite artists to produce auction and to kind of orchestrate an artistic intervention into capitalism, into this platform, as Marialaura already mentioned. My question when I started off the project was really to analyze what kind of role as a curator I could take in this project, because it became quite clear to me since the beginning of my participation that there were already a lot of curatorial layers embedded in a project in itself. In a sense, there was Marialaura and Rebecca who had orchestrated the whole operation, so who were really the curator of the project. Then there were the artists sort of responding to the specific protocols of the platform. And so they had a kind of curatorial role in a sense as well, in the way they were really conceiving and responding to the context while thinking of their intervention. And then, of course, there was the technical layer and infrastructure of the platform itself that was sort of acting as the main curator there. So my question was really, what does it mean to curate in an environment where there are already so many curators? So in an environment which is overly curated. So I decided to take a slightly different entry point into the project and really delve deep into the history of the platform eBay. eBay, as most of you know, was founded in 1997 and was one of the first platforms where really people kind of mingle and came together under the premises of this kind of honest and open marketplace. And this kind of social interaction, we need to remember, was like all pre-Tinder, pre-social media. So it was kind of an interesting community in itself. And in my investigation of the platform and its history, I paid also particular attention at the role of two elements. On the one hand, images. And so the function of images on the platform and how they were really acting as vital interfaces for all the sorts of exchange, both economic and social, that were taking place on the platform. And on the other end, I also started to investigate about the currency of the term and the activity of curator, of curating, and also curator. So by just searching into the eBay database, all sorts of different items were sort of showing up in my search result that in a way offer a really interesting snapshot of the different meanings that this term has online more generally on the web. So in the platform as well, I was able to track down all sorts of literature about curating, from art curating, media curating, content curation. So I started to notice how the currency of the term was quite ambiguous. And it became even more so ambiguous when I realized that there was even a curatorial function embedded in the platform via the creation of a bespoke collection. There was a function that was available to all users to kind of assemble item within a specific section of the website, as in a website inside the website. This function, by the way, no longer exists on eBay. At the time, and here we were in 2017, there was even an office of the chief curator as part of the platform that carefully selected the most interesting story-worth items eBay had to offer and showcased them in beautiful collection. So I really started to ask myself, so what was the currency of project exchange inside of eBay? Were these items that we were commissioning really had visibility on the platform? In a sense, did the very premise of the project, that was to kind of solicit an encounter between art and the user, or sort of spontaneous encounter between art and the eBay user, was that premise met? Or in a sense, the project was circulating inside of a kind of art filter bubble, media filter bubble? And from the point of view of the platform, what was the project? Was that a sort of threat? Was it a kind of breach of security, since it was subverting the mechanics of the platform itself? And so the more I delve into the mechanics of the platform, the more it became clear to me that the visibility of the exchange auction on eBay, and also their successes, were very much tied with the algorithmic dynamic of eBay itself. So I became aware of its search algorithm called Cassini. The algorithm of eBay was updated actually in 2013. And with the sort of implementation of Cassini, eBay launched a sort of new era in the platform, where the platform was kind of promoting much more exchange between users. And this algorithm was publicly launched and presented as a kind of intelligent and innovative algorithm. And the fact that the algorithm was named after an important astronomer of the 17th century, Giovanni Domenico Cassini, and also after an important NASA spacecraft, all of a sudden open a lot of layers in my thinking around curating inside of this project, and also offer a lot of sort of different languages to put together my own curatorial response. So thanks to this connection with astronomy, I was able to kind of find the language of my intervention, which in a sense mixed the language of astronomy and search optimization and curation. So in the first part of my intervention, I invited 3 artists to produce the free commission and really framed the slot of my intervention under the umbrella of eBay as a kind of self-contained universe with its own distinctive community soundtrack and protocol, and introducing the figure of Giovanni Cassini as the kind of important figure in this context. So I won't go too much into detail into that aspect of the project, but as any other guest curator, I was in charge of commissioning 3 artwork as auctions, and I invited Nico Prinsen, Evan Franco Mattes, and Gareth Lynch. And these are some screenshots and documentation of their intervention that you can find in the archive of the project. And as I was commissioning this work, I also started to play around with the function of the eBay collection myself. So taking the opportunity of contextualizing the artists, the artwork being commissioned around within other items and objects that were present on the platform, as you can see in these images. And then in a second part of my participation to the project, I was actually invited by Marialaura Ghidini to reflect even more on this figure of Cassini as sort of the curator of the platform, the algorithmic curator of the platform. So as a result, I was invited by them to produce and perform an auction myself. So I decided eventually to sell on the platform a curatorial consultancy service with Cassini, which intervention that I placed in the category specialty services, eBay auction services, appraisal, and authentication. And the service was tailored to artists and curators who were interested in improving their racial visibility within the platform and within eBay universe of happy transaction. And it was reliable, efficient, and creative, and it was also immaterial, online-based, and bias-specific. My auction was listed and was eventually bought by an artist who ended up then participating in the project exchange, and who produced, as a result of my consultancy service, a fairly successful auction within the context of the project exchange, given my sharing of all the information I'd learned about Cassini after my study and my exploration. So the artist Alessandro Sambini, who produced this listing as a result of our collaboration, was able actually to sell the item at an increased market value as a result of my service. So also in his case, I create a collection on eBay dedicated to the work he had made. And so this kind of collaboration came to a close. But it was very interesting to notice, and here perhaps it's also a good place to open up some questions that throughout my work on the platform, my exchanges with, some of the artists I worked with, but also with Marialaura, who at the time was based in India, we were often confronted by the impossibility of actually accessing or seeing on the platform at each end, we were looking at the platform items. So in a sense, we were confronted with sort of invisibility and geo-blocking on the side of the platform. So this for me was a reminder of also the kind of dark side of algorithmic curating, which is, that of acting as gatekeeping and preventing access and visibility, to images, information, data, and content. So if on the one hand, my intervention sort of was aiming to propose that, there could be a productive and strategic alliance between the human curator and the algorithmic curator, it is also important to be aware of the sort of dark side of this relationship. So I would like just to end on this note. Thank you.
We are happy to take questions if you have any. Maybe I'm very close to the project, but maybe so it's quite difficult to ask questions, but maybe I can ask a question to Gaia about, when you're talking about the fact that you were experimenting with the possibility of creating a strategic alliance between the human and the technological, in this case, the algorithm. Can you maybe describe how, can you talk a little bit more about this idea that this alliance can be strategic, but also have like a dark side to it as well?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I think it's just following from what I was hinting at the conclusion. The sense, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about algorithms sort of being black boxes, and also on the one end, sort of being held accountable for all sorts of misfits and misbehaviors of platform. So I think the debate in that respect kind of polarized a little bit, like the position of the human versus the algorithm. But what I was hinting at through this project was precisely the need actually to work together towards common goals. So in the same sense that we should not forget that behind an algorithm, there is always a human programming and inserting some value, also trying to sort of redirect the common operation that both human and algorithm can undertake towards sort of new values as well. And for that, it's really important also to be aware of and self-critical of the kind of the dark side of filtering and the role of gatekeeping that both the algorithm has on platform, but also the curator has when he's invested in a sort of role of selecting, organizing and arranging both information, but also access to content more generally. So I guess the question for me was not so much was really not so much an opposition, you know, between these two entities or these two curators, but more, you know, the kind of value and what can be achieved through their collaboration.
Thanks.
Hi, Gaia. Thanks so much. Can I ask a question about it as well? It's you know, I think it's a wonderful project, and I was very happy to be following along when you were doing all this fantastic work. I'm really wondering now, because it's been a few years already in a sense, right? How do you look back upon it, and what kind of new things have you learned from this project in a way, also in your own practice as a curator?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to kind of return to the same project, or to a project that has been quite, you know, formative in a sense. And for me, it's more the narrative of it that changes slightly according to the different contexts where I presented. Because in practical terms, I haven't really had many opportunities to develop the project further, even though this whole history of Cassini, as you know, and Marialaura know, got me really passionate. And there was a point where I wanted to organize a kind of life coding event dedicated to this sort of mystical figure of Cassini, bringing together the language of astronomy, code, and all of that. So I think it is a project that had potential other legs, but I think so far I wasn't not really able to really push that further. There was a kind of performative element that begged to be displayed, I think, or took outside of the platform into a kind of multimedia, sensorial, and performative event that may be still in the books, but yet to be realized. But I guess it's more the question of, I mean, it's quite simple, the proposition, you know, of the project, but I guess I'm surprised that the idea of selling, you know, of kind of selling a curatorial consultancy in partnership with an algorithm, in some of the contexts I've presented recently, sparks a kind of interest. And I guess that happened quite recently also in an event part of the series, which was in Italy, in Brescia, where maybe also this kind of curatorial practice can be seen as, you know, quite experimental. So I guess it's also a question of where the discourse is at, and you know, that kind of produces a different response. So it's always interesting for me to take this as a starting point for a number of conversations, in a sense.
I keep my hand raised. I wonder if it's possible to ask a question now.
Yes,
yeah.
Slightly related to a point that Annette's made. I was wondering, you know, your starting point was to think about what can you do in an not overly, but already heavily curated environment. And I suppose, you know, this is the question that we all struggle persistently overall, generally, not just in relation to one specific project and online, but in general, when we contribute to curatorial and art scene. But so starting from this, and maybe it's a question to both of you really about the your specific project, Gaia, but also the overall project. With this in mind, how do you measure, you know, the what you've done, the effect what you've done, the impact what you've done? for the lack of better word, the success. I mean, how do you measure success of projects like this? If you think about, you know, curating in the physical space, you have an exhibition space, you have a gallery venue, you measure audience, you know, you look at audience figures, you look for reviews of projects in a very traditional sense. So you kind of have a feedback of what the impact of the project is. How do you approach this? What are the terms on which you measure the project?
What do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, you can go if you want.
I mean, I think it's different from project to project online. But if I think about Exchange, I mean, Exchange was a very peculiar project in the sense that it started with me and Rebecca inviting some artists to be part of it, and then having curators being part of it, and then having different kind of people wanting to submit projects or artworks as part of Exchange because they've heard about it or they came across about it. And I think because it was 3 months long, it just allowed that to happen. So in that sense, it was quite interesting because so in terms of success, I don't know if I can call it success, but I think it just generated this situation where actually people were involved in it. Even, you know, people could actually participate in the project, even though Rebecca and I were not there. I mean, we could have just not be there and the project could have continued, which was the initial idea, but then projects never continue. So in that sense, I think it was interesting to see that happen. Something else that I think I found this successful, at least for, I mean, how I see curating. The fact that we use eBay and the fact that the artwork existed within eBay without being presented as artworks very often were encountered by people that were not interested in art. So there were people who were looking for plates for their kitchen and they came across an artwork by Sophia Bruckner, or there were people. So there were very different, there was a very different type of audience. And what was interesting is because the function of the auction of eBay makes people, the seller and the buyer, talking to each other about prices, about posting an item. That became a chance for a certain kind of exchange that we wouldn't have had, not even in exhibition space, I guess. So this is the part that I consider successful. So it's not, I guess it's not about quantity. It's about, you know, there were some people then discovering that something was an artwork, but then saying, wow, but these would be wonderful in my kitchen because I'm renovating it. And I found that beautiful. And then there was a whole conversation about the algorithm that was used to make the artwork. So, and, you know, we would know these, because of the artists were telling us or were sending us information. So we were very, I mean, we were very much in the process, but also very much outside the process of the show. And I think that was the part that I enjoyed more as a curator.
And if I can just quickly add, I mean, the question you posed was very close to me because I was doing this work also as part of my PhD research. So I really thought through every step of the process very intensely. But so for me, that question was actually very, very hard to answer. And it led me to actually even speculate of a kind of paradox, which is inside of the activity of online curating, that it's really at the threshold between visibility and invisibility in a sense. And, you know, the paradox is like either you frame what you're doing as kind of art and that maybe you run the risk of producing a sort of a filter bubble of some sort, or you don't, and then you have the risk of just disappearing, you know, whatever you do just disappear within the plethora of content that is produced online. So I think this is a very, very interesting tension that it's part of the process of curating online. So that's the only way I came up with a kind of response to this question of how do you measure, in a sense. Well, it's really hard to measure because it's, you know, you kind of also move in between this kind of two opposite tension. So that's more maybe on a kind of speculative level.
Rebecca, I see you have your hand raised. Oh, you're mute, or you're muted.
I'm too tired. It's good that I'm practicing talking now. Yeah, just something that you said, Marialaura, about the artist artwork existing on eBay, and then and Gaia, you just touched on it about, you know, identifying maybe things as an artwork rather than disappearing into the plethora of content. And I was just thinking about professionalization and what of this practice is. And, you know, you described eBay so clearly as its own context, its own situation, its own community with a set of rules. And of course, there's plenty of people who have like eBay practices which don't need to go beyond anything else except this, you know, it's an activity, it's a hobby, it's a passion, it's an interest, it's maybe a profession in a certain way generating cash, but it's not being identified as an art practice. And I just wondered, yeah, I mean, is it still useful, do you think, to have these definitions of this idea? Because I mean, a professional art practice is a really recent concept anyway. So I was just thinking about, yeah, stepping into those spaces and saying, well, I'm doing this, but I'm doing it as an artist rather than I'm doing this as an eBay enthusiast who thinks this is really fascinating. And is it used? I mean, the thing you mentioned about visibility, but other aspects of it that are useful or not useful?
You want to go, Marialaura?
It's a difficult question, so if you want to take it first.
Well, fine. I mean, I guess this is, for me, it's something that I'm constantly grappling with as I, you know, experience and explore the space of the web. And to me, I guess the distinction of, it's less about what constitutes art or not art, but it's more the kind of relationship you want to produce with technology, in a sense, that to me, it's more relevant at this point in time, that maybe that constitutes art in a sense, or criticality, and perhaps hence it could be closer to what is the role of the artist today. So, and again, I think my attempt to, through the intervention, my attempt was in a sense also to push that, like, it's not so much about what the category is, but it's more the kind of alliance one wants to create with technology in a specific context and you know, space. So I guess this is, you know, one might have various positions vis-a-vis this question, but so I can just share what is mine. I think at the moment, you know, an art practice sits next to an eBay practice, and that's extremely interesting. And there might be overlap or not, and friction about that. But again, it's a very sort of vibrant, chaotic, and hybrid context we're grappling with. So there is a reflection to me, or a question to be posed about, is it still relevant to think in terms of this distinction, or more in terms of the kind of alliances one wants to create within a certain context.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, those are questions I'm grappling with all the time. That's why it's nice to get other people's perspectives. Thank you. Yeah,
I mean, I side with Gaia. I don't know. I mean, in terms of my practice, I do think it's useful to deprofessionalize yourself. I mean, but that's in any sort of practice. I mean, so to give a concrete example, also the idea of like, I don't know, working as a curator in a different environment, which could be eBay or it could be a shop, you know, organizing an exhibition in a shop. I mean, allows you, you know, to step back and see things differently. So while you're organizing a project, you're working as a curator, but in terms of like exchanges, you were saying, you might have the eBay hat on, the artist hat on, the buyer or collector artist, and you start seeing things from different perspectives. So I haven't replied to the question, but I guess that's what I'm thinking about, you know, the relationship between, I don't know, professional and non-professional practice. We have our second presentation is by Rebecca Birch and Rob Smith of Field Broadcast. Rebecca Birch is an artist working with film, live broadcast, and narrative performance to tell the stories of place-based encounters between people and ecosystem. And she's currently visiting scholar at the Oslo School of Environmental Humanities at the University of Oslo, while Rob Smith is a visual artist based in Newcastle, UK, and co-director of Art Houses, an Arts Council funded project that hosts artworks in people's homes and Whitley Bay. They together developed the project Field Broadcast, which have been following for years. So I'm very glad they're here to talk to us about it. And now I'll mute myself and I'll let you go.
Thanks so much, Marialaura. Thanks for the invitation to speak here.
So shall I start? Yes. Yeah. So Field Broadcast began in 2010 as a project that we designed to enable artists to make live streaming video artworks from remote locations and connect to audiences through some software that we designed. And this software was designed so that once it was downloaded, it would sit on people's computers and wait for a broadcast in the field to go live. And at this point in time, it would go ping really loudly, and it would open a window on the viewer's screen, interrupting whatever they were doing, and display the incoming broadcast from the artist in the field. So this was a project that developed from within our practice as artists. It came from our shared interests in working directly in the landscape, along with a sort of curiosity of what these opportunities that digital technologies provided to make connections between people and remote locations. So in this sense, I've sort of begun to sort of contextualize it more as a project that has its roots in the histories of land art and the ways that artists have used sort of photography, film, television broadcast to open up this expanded field of practice, as well as being a project that is a project that explores digital space. So, and I think also it's important to note that since our first project in 2010, the internet has changed a great deal. So with the initial projects, we were targeting only desktop computers, for example, and people didn't really have mobile phones. And we used to connect to the internet using dongles, which I managed to find one yesterday. So, we used to have to plug that into our laptop to get an internet connection in a field, and 4G mobile didn't exist. broadband internet connections were maybe sort of 2 megabits per second. And so, you know, and that limited the bandwidth of the live broadcasts we were making. But it's really interesting that these sort of, and it's something we'll sort of pick up on in the presentation, is they became points of friction, and they added sort of texture to the broadcast and gave a particular quality and perhaps liveness to the works that were being produced. But yeah, there's always been this negotiation between with the technologies we were working with, and having to adapt our ways of working. Yeah, working around sort of awkward software updates and changing operating systems, but also then sort of working with the artists through the time of the projects, and watching and talking to the artists about their sort of changing expectations or desires for what a live streaming platform could be. But I'm now going to, after this short introduction, just hand over to Rebecca, who's going to give an impression of what it was like to experience one of these field broadcast projects.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, so we're aware always that when we describe how it worked, it's always quite abstract. So to describe how the very first broadcast series worked, I'm going to tell you a story. So we're going back to 2010, actually 2011, but that's, yeah. But as Rob said, things have changed since then, and we'll expand on how the project developed and changed and where it took us to afterwards. But I'll just share my screen. Are you all seeing that? Yep. So I'm just going to tell you a little story about an imagined viewer, Anna. It's an evening, it's July, it's 2011. She's sitting at her desk in her room in London. Her desk faces the wall. There's a window to her right, but she's not really paying any attention to it. She's focused on her laptop screen. So she's aware of the window, but totally ignoring events outside of it. In the corner of her laptop screen, there's a little grey circle displaying the words, "not live." She's not really sure what the circle does, but her friend, who's an artist involved in the project, sent her the link to download the software and said, "Do this, it'll be good." So Anna's writing an invoice, adding up receipts for replacement batteries, taxi fares and cables, and trying to remember purchases she might have forgotten. It's 8:47 p.m, but again, she's not particularly aware of that, and she isn't intending on moving. She's got a cup of coffee and a long evening of admin ahead. But then, a ping. And a window opens on her screen, obscuring her cursor and most of the invoice. She's momentarily confused, but she realizes that the grey button has turned orange and that this is a field broadcast. Are you hearing the sound through my screen as well? Cool, that's good. She looks directly into the screen, framed by her own invoice, to green grass against a petrol blue sky. Just to note, I don't have any documentation of her receiving the broadcast because she's imaginary, so this is Rob receiving the broadcast. It's dark in the image. She realizes it's dark in her room. She realizes that outside and it's gone dark. And the off-camera light is illuminating the image screen and reflecting back to her face, because actually her laptop is the only source of light in her room. So the light's exploring the space of the screen image, and in its reflection, Anna's face. So the computer screen, I mean, historically it's been described with the language of transparency of windows. And in a sense, this is how this seems to Anna. It's a transparent window, maybe even a portal, but a very formal portal of 640 by 480 pixels precisely. And what she's seeing through this window, she's seeing actually another version of the present moment for somebody else. Through the portal there, the artist Dan. We don't need to imagine Dan, he's real. Dan Walwyn, we'd invited him to make one of his broadcasts. He's got a 3 mobile dongle, as shown by Rob earlier, a video camera, connected to a computer by a cable, a microphone connected to the computer by an audio interface, a mechanical digger, not necessary, but he had one, and a recording of birdsong. He was worried that actual birdsong might not deliver. This is the contingency of working in the field, so he wanted to make sure that there was birdsong. That's just another example of the setup. Here you can see we also have a mobile power unit in the form of a car leisure battery. And you can see the framing software, the streaming software that Dan is using to send the broadcast. So there's a lot of hardware at the broadcasting end. And with Dan, there was an actress performing in the car. And at the same time, so she's in the car, watching Dan on the digger. Anna's watching Dan on the digger through the screen. And there's a sense of an unfolding event. This is a broadcast which is essentially a kind of a narrative, a performance, a short film, delivered live, occurring at sunset, using the sunset as part of it, in correspondence with Anna's sunset. That was the second broadcast that Dan sent for us. The first one was in our first series in 2010, and it was entitled Choice. Again, he employed actors. Not all of the artists who worked with us worked in this way. Others made works that were entirely text-based, digital. We can talk about that a bit later. But Dan chose to perform these narrative pieces. So in Choice, actors were employed standing on an island in a salt marsh. And as the tide came in, the island became smaller and smaller. So Walwyn used the specifics of the location and the specifics of the time as part of the narrative in his broadcast. He collaborated with the landscape. But of course, he couldn't control everything. He couldn't control the weather. There's a provisionality here and a contingency. And he can't also control the place of reception. So this is something that became really interesting to us, that the broadcasts were sent by artists within their frame, very carefully planned and considered, but how they were received was different for every viewer. What they montaged with, both on the screen and in the room. What else was going on in the room? Were there other people? Was the artist alone? One broadcast actually arrived onto the desktop computer of a laptop, someone giving a speech, a talk. So it went out to a conference PowerPoint presentation. So the broadcasts, in a sense, were completed by the viewer. They were not broadcasts they were not performances in the field, they were performances within the transmission. And they were nested amongst all sorts of other clutter. This is a broadcast by Dan Coopy from the same series in 2011. This is another evening that Anna received it. If we go back to her, she was perhaps not working anymore, but just resting. And the screen came, the frame appeared. She was annoyed, but she didn't really want to move, so she let it play through. That's Dan in the field. So Dan had a piece of animation software that Rob built. So again, different broadcasts employed different means. the animation software, Rob would explain it better, but effectively he was layering images of the landscape into the broadcast, adding them. So this time Anna felt that rather than being a portal, perhaps it was kind of coming to her. The landscape was filling her screen, obscuring her view through. And sometimes they buffered.
Sometimes.
And so these were the first, I mean, at this point, I guess we can, yeah, let's stop talking about Anna. We'll talk about the general experiences. We got really interested in both the experience of the audience and also the way in which this site, the broadcast came from, was dispersed. Rob mentioned land artists earlier, and one reference point that I drew upon often was thinking about Robert Smithson's mirror travels in the Yucatan, that act of putting mirrors into the landscape and reflecting the landscape around. So essentially, we dispersed the site across different people's laptops around the world. We had viewers in different places. So again, although they were specific times, these broadcasts were specifically at sunset. For other people, they arrived in the middle of the day. So they served as an interruption. And so the first two series, we focused on like remote locations in 2010 and in 2011. And we asked the artists to think about where they would go. And some other unexpected things came up. I'm just going to stop this. In the first one, we asked them to go to a field, and they became really nostalgic, a lot of them, and went to fields nearby where they'd grown up. So we've been thinking about the field as a space of, as a kind of blank space, but actually the artist filled it with other references, which then were shared to the audience. This second series was called Field Broadcast West, and we sent them all out at sunset because we got very interested in that sense of time embedded and working with the location and the situation of the location. After that, we got really interested in the experience for the audience, and we realized that we hadn't paid much attention to them in the first two series. So in our third series, we worked directly as a professional development project with several artists who we knew would think about the audience and think about the intrusion and the interruption. Because essentially these broadcasts arrived when people were not ready to look at art. I mean, it's interesting, again, thinking about the role of the artist, the professionalization of the artist. People weren't in art viewing mode, but these broadcasts arrived. They arrived over Bake Off. And so in our third series, Erica Scorti, for example, inserted herself into the screen and directly addressed people. And Rob, do you want to talk a bit more about how Matthew de Kersaint-Giraudoux built on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say as well, it's like, you know, with the sense of the interruption, you know, and this sort of the fact that the viewer didn't know when they were going to be interrupted, and we had no control over where, you know, what was on people's screens when people were interrupted. It just meant that each viewer's screen became this unique montage space. And I think what, you know, I became really interested in was that it reversed the kind of this idea of the live broadcast as a portal to a remote site, and actually this sort of the flow and the direction changed, so that then it was more that the image from the site was flowing back to multiple viewers. So there's this very much this sense of the distribution and the spreading of the site. So it moves the focus of broadcast away from the site of broadcast more to a sort of the artwork being created at the site of reception. But yeah, I mean, and it's just such a key thing. But yeah, and you were just starting to sort of say this, Rebecca, that we sort of began to sort of in the development of the project after the initial sort of broadcast series, you know, and it was one of the really great things about being an artist-led project, meant that you know, we were able to have these dialogues with the artists we were working with, and we were sort of able to work with them and adapt the project as it evolved, so that we were sort of reacting to sort of their questions and their sort of so in this example on the slide here, we were working with an artist called Candice Jacobs in the 2013 project Caddy Life. And Candice was just like, well, why is it only one window? Why does it have to be this in the middle, this size? Why can't I have 10 windows? Why can't we do this? And so, and it's really great because, it challenged our assumptions about the projects, and, but also, yeah, it sort of meant
the capability of the streams. I mean, at first the window was a specific size because it really, you couldn't stream anything much bigger. But of course, the hardware developed. So sorry, Rob. Yeah,
absolutely, yes. And I remember particularly with Candice's broadcast here, even then it was sort of pushing the limits of how much data you could shove through a broadband line, which, I don't think would at all be an issue now. But then, as we referred to earlier, it's like that buffering. It was sort of, because every so often it would glitch or buffer, or there would be those sort of, there's no post-production in live video. So, the glitches and those little mistakes, you could call them, they're actually things which add a texture and create this liveness within the works that were produced.
And so, and it stepped like this work by Candice. So at first they were very, the first day was very polite. You could move the window to one side of your screen and keep it going. Simon Faithfull made a 45-minute broadcast. You could do something else whilst watching it. But this one by Candice, you can see this largest window is completely obscuring anything else you were trying to do. So you would have to choose to either watch the broadcast or leave. I think that we've been talking for quite a long time, but I just wanted to mention this project, the final project that we did really as field broadcast was called Interruptions. And it was research from Matthew Dekker St. Giraudot, who we'd worked with in 2013. And he made a whole series of events thinking about interruption. And at that point, of course, we were starting to be interrupted all the time. Social media had changed. Other material was being pushed. Things like broadcasts, like live streams, were being pushed at us from different directions. And so he asked Rob to develop something that actually sat inside the web browser and interrupted people as they browsed the web. Previously, field broadcast was always outside. So you could just read the description that you got when you downloaded it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of parallel to the question that Gaia was asking of how do you curate in an over-curated space? And I think the question that Matt and Sam was really asking was how can you make an interruption in a space where you're constantly being interrupted? And they were sort of really interested in sort of, what it was to consent, I suppose, in some ways, to an interruption. But so essentially the project we developed to react to sort of this changing online space was to create a web, what did we call it? A web extension.
Yeah.
And so it was a bit of add-on software that you could add into your browser. Yeah. And this software would then be scanning the pages you were looking at. So on this slide here, for example, it had word triggers. So there were, I think it was words like fitness or well-being would trigger animations of joggers or people riding these Segway scooters, which were very popular at the time. And but other things were scheduled events.
Other things triggered Adele.
Yeah, I can't remember what triggered Adele. But yeah, I remember there was one where they had a breakfast news slot, didn't they? And so they sort of would be taking and montaging news clips from, and then making reactive artworks at the time that were then sort of placed into this space of the browser. But yeah, and then I suppose ultimately what happened is Google changed the rules, and basically our web extension got taken down, and you're not allowed to do these things anymore. It's just not permitted. And I say this because I think it's sort of, even with the sort of the mechanisms we were using to make these interruptions into viewers' screen spaces have become increasingly difficult through over time. So there's this sort of sense, or certainly, maybe more technically able programmers can find these routes, but certainly this sort of sense that there were pathways which, would allow us to make these interventions into people's screen space and create these montages within the space of the screen, have become, the rules have become stricter, or the sort of pathways that are permitted have become so much more prescribed. So for example, a sort of a push notification, which is essentially what we were using to alert our software that it's live, would now have to run through the the prescribed push notification routes, and it would stick a little box in the top corner. And of course, everybody knows that we're fed up of being interrupted, and everyone mutes them anyway. So, how can we continue to make sort of interruptive works in a space of continual interruption?
Well, I think we'll stop there, because I think we open up to some questions.
Overrunning.
Yeah.
Thank you for the amazing presentation. And I'm very glad you did it this way, because it really shows like many interesting aspects. It shows the way it developed over the course of time, but it also shows, that part that we never really actually think about, which is, all of the nitty-gritty of organizing a project like that, or broadcasting from a film. Like, it was very nice to see like actual hardware in
but it's that
mobile things.
The hardware that is very much part of the project for me. Yeah. It's like it feels like it's really essential to be sort of showing that.
Hours in the field swearing bits of equipment. It really was. There's a lot of the process of making it that is definitely not at all in the final works. And I think that's something that we've both continued to, and it's integral to Rob's practice, I would say.
And there's that wider technological assemblage, isn't there, of the servers, the sort of the mobile connection towers, all of these bits of infrastructure that are not visible in our normal sort of interactions with online spaces. And it's like anything of that sort of, and that's, I think, why I pick up on this idea of the friction, because it's when things start to glitch that the technology around us becomes visible. And, it's sort of,
and we learned, and there's interesting things, like one artist wanted to make a broadcast from very close, I think it was from Portland, where there's a massive like military presence, and it turned out there just wasn't enough, that they've knocked out the 3G signal there. You can't be connect to the, you can't. So there was really interesting things that the process of trying to send broadcasts from particular places revealed about the infrastructures that surround us that we can't see, and the control of those spaces. Annette, you had a question.
Yeah, fantastic. I love it. I don't think I've ever actually encountered live, in a way, the projects in a sense, but the way that you describe them by both storytelling and making all this new documentation out of it, I think is wonderful, and it gives me some insight indeed in the projects that once were, in a sense. And that also comes to my question is, my God, are you going to do this? How are you going to, along with this, are you going to indeed make all kinds of new documents again, in a way, documentaries almost of the projects? And how do you deal with that?
Career-wise, it's really dumb to work with stuff that goes obsolete, because you kind of like suddenly, it's strange to come and to feel, when Marialaura contacted us earlier to add us to this amazing archive she's putting together, it's like, oh yeah, we are like becoming historicized now. And we did, so and it's funny because the pandemic, the first lockdown in the UK coincided with like the 10-year anniversary of our first series in May 2010. And there was a bit of me that really wanted to do another broadcast series, but everybody was broadcasting. And I was really annoyed, because I still felt like actually people were still not really doing what was really possible, or pushing the live stream. But Rob Smith did, and that's what we were going to move, or the kind of online exhibition. So Rob organised a show. He was busy with art houses. He's moved on, and I guess that's what we've done. We've applied the learning to other places. So I'm ahead of commission in that first year. Was it like 2020? I feel like time is so weird now. So I made a Zoom work, which was 3 Zoom meetings from an elk post, because I live in Norway now, in the forest above my home. So it was waiting for a moose. It was about hunting and watching and being in landscape. But it felt very much in the spirit of field broadcast, because I had several like cameras. And so I had an image that I was looking from the view that the moose might walk into if we were lucky. And then I also had a close-up camera that I could walk into the image, and I was showing the texture of the ground. So the first part of the Zoom meeting was trying to get the people that were on the Zoom call with me into this like sensory experience of the earth, I suppose, so that they would feel the sitting, so that they could imagine that they were sitting on the damp ground with me. And then we watched as it got dark. I did that several times. I did one at dawn as well. So it employed lots of things that we'd learned, but I was using it as playing with those things as an artist. Rob, meanwhile, did an online version of his art houses exhibition, which is normally in a way also related to field broadcast, in that it's artworks in domestic spaces that you see outside of the gallery. But Rob, yeah, do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, well, it's just normally it's a project that's we commission artworks to be shown in people's homes. So they're sort of made in dialogue with householders, and there's the artists then show them in people's homes. There's a big festival, and everyone comes on a weekend, and it's an amazing sort of opportunity to sort of open, sort of build new audiences for contemporary art practices in unique settings. But then obviously in the pandemic, people didn't want 1,000 people rocking up to their house to look at artwork. So we moved the project online, and again there was this sort of sense of inverting this sort of thing. So we asked artists to make artworks from their home, so that then people were getting insights into their home rather than it being someone else's house. But the way that we formatted the project was that essentially it became live over a week, and there was 5 tabs for the days like Monday to Friday down the side of the page, of the web page. And on the first day, only the content for Monday was available, and then sort of throughout the week, sort of more and more content became available. But it was that sort of sense that by sort of temporarily linking content and making it available to people at particular times, or sort of mixing the sort of sense of live events with recorded content, or sort of working within the space of the website as a sort of a curatorial space for sort of presentation. It sort of it was building a sense of a festival, but it was all sort of stuff that we had learned, or I had learned through field broadcast. And but I suppose it was only really, I think it was Bram Thomas Arnold, who we worked with on field broadcast, just when we were putting it out, it just said, oh, very field broadcast this. So it's just really nice that sort of there was people from the past of one project picking up into another. But yeah, it's kind of where this is, that sort of sense of, wouldn't it have been great to do a field broadcast series at the start of the pandemic? But that space has really changed, and I think that was why the Elk Post project worked so well. It's because the interface of Zoom suddenly was in everybody's forefront of their minds, and it was is what Rebecca did was to really take on that sort of platform and just sort of go, okay. And it's very much in the sort of sense that with the field broadcasts, with the initial development of those projects, it was I know a bit of programming, but I'm not sort of designing stuff ahead of time. It's just that I saw an opportunity with mobile internet speeds hitting a speed that was sufficient to make a live broadcast. And I knew just about enough to make an app that could make that available. So it was a sense of looking for strategies and opportunities within the space of the internet that exists at that point in time. That is more of, I suppose, my sort of curatorial approach to online space.
But just, yeah, and to come back to the interesting point you made, Annette, about like storytelling and missing things and hearing about them again, I suppose, I mean, I've always been interested in my practice in things that, in oral histories and how things become kind of mythologized, if you like. And we were very, I mean, when we talked about field broadcasting presentations at the time, we did a little bit of research into kind of earlier television. And this was when the iPlayer, you know, it was when people began watching television asynchronously, is now the word, isn't it, we use. So we were kind of nostalgic for these kind of, you know, the event, like the final of Pop Idol or whatever, that everybody is, you only see then, like the live TV event that you actually have to see and you miss it. And we really liked it when there was like interactions on Twitter or whatever about the broadcasts that were coming out. So I guess in that sense, it's kind of perfect that it's just a thing that some people remember and some other people don't remember. And that's okay.
We have, thank you very much for this. We have a little bit more time if someone has a pressing question, otherwise we can also speak later at the end of the event with more questions. Marlo, I hope I pronounce it correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. No, you were saying that working with obsolete technology is a challenge for your career. So I was wondering, while working on this project, were you aware of how fast like internet technology kind of evolves and changes?
Yeah, I mean, it made it really, because what we haven't mentioned, so when we did the first project in 2010, and then it slightly snowballed. And not only did we have our own projects and a funded, like another one the following year, and then a funded period of work from the Arts Council for, I think it was the year 2013-14, but we also got asked, we suddenly became, because galleries were being asked to make content available digitally. So suddenly people wanted to be partners with us. And so we did a lot of other like side projects where we made versions of the software. Mm-hmm. So we were making maybe a new version of the software every couple of months at one point. And literally every time we made a new version of the software, it didn't work on somebody's operating system. Yeah. So every time Rob had to tear his hair out and figure out what the problem was and what the new blocking system, you know, to the point that we had to have quite long instructions. I think it was in the end, first of all, it was worse for PC, and in the end it was worse for Mac. Like, okay, it will say, are you sure you want to install this? Just say you don't, you know, and overriding the, like those kind of blocking systems.
But also it's sort of, you know, the way to get around it was to pay Apple money to be a registered developer. And it was just kind of like they were closing down those sort of spaces to, you know, or sort of monetizing it, or, you know, I don't know what particularly their strategy is, you know, but yeah. And the particular thing that really did us over one time was a thing called AppNap that Apple developed, which, you know, puts the applications which are not in focus at the front of your screen go to sleep. And so we didn't realize this actually until one of our projects went live, and then people were saying, hang on a minute, it's not going ping. And it was just because they had made this new feature, not really announced it, and it was just going to sleep in the background. So it wasn't performing those alerting roles. And so, yeah, it was like constantly there was this sort of sense of having to update, work around. But then also, you know, I guess we knew that it was changing, which is why we were sort of wanting to create these projects where there was sort of space for dialogue and sort of building conversation about where it's going and what those spaces are changing into.
And also understanding of the internet. The first Arts Council application we did got sent back and declined because they thought our audience figures were off and they couldn't. So we wanted, as part of the Arts Council application, to build a version for mobile and tablets. So we had to develop an app, and there's costs involved. And they said, there's no reason to develop an app. You haven't got enough audience, you know, you haven't got online engagement. And they totally didn't get. So the idea, because when you fill an Arts Council application in, certainly then, you had audience, like real physical audience, and then you had digital engagement. And of course, our audience was entirely, so we had to make this case in the arts, in the text, that our digital audience, that there was a difference between the people who tuned into the broadcast, which we could count, and the people who visited our website. But they, you know, the first Arts Council officer who looked at the application couldn't even understand that the main audience might be online.
It didn't fit with their expectation of what an app should be doing.
Yeah, or what like digital content does. It's meant to augment an existing physical offer, not, yeah, which of course now has totally changed. I think there's another question from...
Yeah, we'll take this last question. We are running quite late, so yeah, we'll take the next one, Tierno, and then after that we will have a break of 10 minutes before the next two presentations.
Hello, hi, there's two of us here, so I'm Scarlett. So excuses for the name, but I was really interested in your imagined user, Anna, and the forms of documentation that you had, similar to what Annette was saying about the storytelling, about the way that you're, I guess in a way, archiving the experience of the user through what you imagine they would be experiencing. I was just curious as to what or how, or especially because you said that in the third iteration there was more interest in the user experience, but I was just curious as to how much engagement you saw from your audience throughout all three iterations, and how much they wanted to give of their own experience, because I saw that there was a lot of images of both their digital experiences as well as their physical surroundings. So I was just curious as to how you engaged with that as well.
So we didn't actively, I mean, you know, we didn't have hashtags like on the broadcast, like the Bake Off would do, for example, encouraging people to interact in other forums, but we did love it. We got, certainly by the, we did another series in 2014 that we haven't mentioned, but actually Rory is here and somewhere, he was in it. But I think then we got a lot of like shots of people taking photographs, screenshots of their phone or whatever, and tweeting like, oh, this little red boat just sailed across my screen and it coincides with the things that with whatever I'm working on. So we got those kind of feedbacks. But other feedbacks we didn't get till much later, because, as you know, because Annette mentioned earlier, it's this kind of experience that you maybe saw, you maybe didn't see. Sometimes we bumped into people and they remembered it and they suddenly told us a story. But we didn't really like invite that. I think partly because that would feel felt outside of the spirit, because in a way it was about just sending something, and it was about quite an intimate experience actually in some ways to receive these. We know you could be alone with your device, with your phone or with your computer, and you suddenly got this broadcast direct from somewhere which maybe had an artist's body and maybe didn't. Maybe you were seeing what they were seeing, maybe they were typing or speaking directly to you. And I think sometimes they weren't necessarily things that, it wasn't a kind of event that you would immediately start Facebooking or tweeting about, if that makes sense. So I think sometimes they were quite private experiences that we didn't really hear about, and that's also fine, if that answers your question.
It did, thank you so much.
Teresa Havlíková in Constant Dullaart of Common Garden and Distant Gallery. Teresa Havlíková is an art historian and curator living in Berlin, whose research focuses on net art and digital art. And she's a founding member of Zentrum für Netzkunst in Berlin. Excuse the pronunciation if it wasn't correct. And we have Constant Dullaart, who I don't know, might join us a little bit later on in the presentation. is a Dutch artist who reflects on the broad cultural and social effects of communication and image processing technologies, while critically engaging the power structures of mega corporation. So I'm very glad you could join us, and I'll let you take over the floor.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having us. I will start with a quick presentation. Constant is already here, so he will join for the Q&A after my brief presentation. Let me just share my screen with you. Okay, so I really hope you can see the full screen now. Yes, okay, perfect. I think this presentation will be a little bit different because Common Garden and Distant Gallery are two projects that are still ongoing. So I will not just talk about the origin of these projects, but also about how they work, especially Common Garden, and how can you use them, or how is it possible to use them. And I will mainly focus on the social and spatial aspect of Common Garden, and later I will just shortly introduce the new project Distant Gallery. The idea of Common Garden is to offer a platform for online social interaction and communication, which is adaptable for different needs, formats, or events. It is easy to use and allows anyone with internet connection to start their own space for free. Even though Common Garden was mostly being used to employ online exhibitions, the concept is very open. So the application can be very diverse, from online co-working space to a lecture hall, family game nights, viewing party with friends, you name it. What's the story behind Common Garden? As we already heard from Marialaura, the landscape of curating kind of changed with the whole pandemic situation. And the lockdown regulations really forced museums and galleries to move their exhibitions and activities to the online space. But the results were often not very creative. Most of the online exhibitions were limited to an imitation of 3D gallery spaces, which appeared completely empty without any present body of the visitor, allowing no social interaction. And if there was a potential for social interactions, there were these exhibitions that were designed in a kind of outdated aesthetics, turning the exhibition visit into some sort of 90s game setting, really overshadowing the actual artworks in the exhibitions. And of course, the easiest way for art institutions to go online was to use commercial platforms or social media, which made them dependable on third parties sharing and risking their private data. So it's this lack of interest in online exhibition at the beginning of the pandemic that motivated the artist Constant Dullaart to develop his own online platform, which is based on an online exhibition he and Jonas Lund did in 2011 for Temporary Stedelijk. The exhibition consisted of a big Scrabble website where artworks were placed next to each other, rather than being listed in a long list of hyperlinks. And this mode of presentation has become one of the essential principles of Common Garden. In 2020, Constant Dullaart started to collaborate with the Upstream Gallery in Amsterdam, where a series of online exhibitions took place and where he worked with Ties van Assedonk, Jenne Robert Lichte, Jonas Lund, and Deborah Mora. And later in 2020, he got the Rapid Response Fellowship by IBEAM, which helped him to continue developing Common Garden with Ties van Assedonk and Jonas Lund, with the aim to create a non-commercial platform available for everyone. And it has been an ongoing project since then. How does it work? As you can see here, you can create Common Garden or enter a Common Garden show in your browser. You don't need to install any app or browser extensions. Once you register with your email address, you can start to design your garden right away. You can place different objects and elements in the garden, like embedded videos from YouTube or Vimeo. You can add static images or changing slideshows. You can add text, PDFs, but also more interactive elements. Basically, you can embed any website you would like in an iframe. So in this way, the platform really offers a wide spectrum of tools to display artworks from different media, ranging from more traditional ones like painting or photography, but also new media and online only or online specific art. As soon as you or as the visitor moves in a garden, a navigation map of the exhibition pops up in the left corner. And this navigation map represents a model of the whole exhibition space and allows you to quickly travel between the artworks and elements in your show. And it also allows you to see the other visitors in your garden or in your space. Here you can see how this easy editor for Common Garden works. You can access the editor directly in your browser and design your garden completely from here. You don't need anything else. And as you can see here in the down corner, there is a text view where you can also add your own CSS. And this is really something I like about Common Garden, is that even though there are many elements ready for you to play around with, you can still change the garden a lot by using CSS. So in the sense, the platform is not completely pre-shaped by the editor or by us, but it's open for your ideas. And there were some institutions or clients or curators that really did take the concept quite far or somewhere where we wouldn't necessarily think of. So this concept of openness is also quite important for Common Garden. As you can see here, this is how you as a visitor or how the visitors appear in Common Garden. They appear with their nicknames. You can choose your nickname every time you enter a show, which means that you don't need to identify with some account. You can change your identity every time you enter a show. And when two or more visitors come close to each other, a gray bubble appears around them. And as long as the visitors stay in that shared bubble, they can talk to each other via microphone, as if they were standing together in an exhibition space in front of an artwork. They can also share the video in video avatars, so they can see each other a little bit like in a Zoom, but they can still move. But there are even more settings for the social interactions. It is also possible to talk to the whole audience at once, like a presenter, which you can see on the video on the right side. And this is very great for tours or panels or artist talks, where one avatar or more avatars appear a little bit bigger, moving around, and the audience can basically follow the presenter and ask questions via an open microphone. But this is also possible to record a tour and make it accessible for visitors who can't make it to the live event. So they can listen to this tour or follow this tour anytime after the live event. So as you can see, the platform really allows many different direction of social interaction. You can have private conversation with your friends during an opening. You can have a bigger group of people talking to each other. Common Garden makes it possible to translate many established gallery or museum formats into an online environment. And even though the event formats can be familiar from the exhibition setting, the social experience of Common Garden is also uniquely different. For example, when you have a private conversation with someone, it can easily happen that someone bumps into your bubble and you are kind of forced to change to a more formal conversation. Or some users might be just running away from you in the exhibition space, or you can spend your whole night looking for someone in the exhibition opening and they never really appear there as avatar. So it's really the combination of the spatial and social aspect of Common Garden that makes the platform as powerful as it is. The freedom of movement changes the flow of the online social interaction in compared to the established static online calls or meetings, because you have the choice who you want to talk to and for how long. If someone is standing next to you in a bubble, they can't simply mute themselves, but they have to actually move and go away. But it is also very nice to have the choice not to share your image all the time and only reveal yourself when you are actually standing close to someone. So in this sense, I think the platform really has or offers you quite a relaxed position in between the constant perception of you and your avatar present in the exhibition, and the focus on the actual artworks and the architecture of the show. And this really allows you to shift back and forth between you in the platform itself, and the artworks and the exhibited elements. So as I said, Common Garden is available for everyone. It's for free. You can register it just by using your email. It doesn't store any private data, and you can forward your garden or your show to any domain you have so that your visitors don't even notice that they are in Common Garden. We do offer some premium features for a small fee, but that depends on the client and on the institutions. Basically, we are doing our best to support small independent groups and curators, but we also work with bigger institutions to provide them a functioning platform for their regular online program. And that in return helps us to develop new features and functions. So because of the social and spatial possibilities of Common Garden, the platform does not just replace the physical museum or extend it. It creates a unique curatorial concept. And from my experience, people who don't visit contemporary art institutions on a regular basis and who feel sort of shy when confronted with media art are very comfortable in Common Garden because it takes away certain pressure or maybe edge of traditional white cube. And especially installation of computers in galleries can be quite intimidating. So in comparison, sitting at home in Common Garden really gives you the time to engage with especially net art or internet art. So in my eyes, the platform really has a big potential for art education, especially for the digital and online art, because it makes it possible to talk about the art in front of it. And talking about art, of course, always contributes to better understanding of the art that you are dealing with. But also, it allows you to contextualize the artworks by making it possible to show them next to each other in one simple environment. But because, of course, curating in Common Garden is different than curating in a physical space, we found out that we need to provide a different kind of support for curators and artists. They first need to understand the logic or the function of Common Garden in order to really start to think what is possible and how they can benefit from the platform. For example, we created online tutorials so that everyone can get an easy overview of all the functions. But we are also very happy to personally help curators to customize their gardens. And I think also the fact that there are actual people on the other side of the platform that you can, as user, actually contact and have a conversation with is another pleasant social experience of this independent platform, which you probably wouldn't have using Instagram or YouTube. So that would be Common Garden, and then I would just briefly introduce you to Distant Gallery, which is the second project. And a series of online exhibition running on Common Garden that will start after a small delay in February. Every exhibition of the series will be created from a host city where local artists from that host city exhibit in the same online conditions and contexts as artists from the other side of the globe. And the exhibitions are structured in blocks with a show opening each Monday during the local office hours. The exhibitions are also produced in cooperation with local institutions and artists, and all exhibitions from one block should share their whole network, really connecting the different parts of the world. So this gallery really is also an attempt to connect the local with the global and offer a very simple tool to create online without having very knowledge of HTML or CSS or having other resources. Yeah, we had a small Christmas launch of Distant Gallery this December, and we really hope to start this project in February. We have some confirmed shows from New Mexico, Bogota, Amsterdam, Shiraz, but also other cities. And hopefully when there's the first book, we can see how far and how Common Garden and Distant Gallery can become more alive and how the principle of Common Garden can be used. I think that's all from me and this presentation. If you decide to use Common Garden, or if you want to give it a try and test something, here's an email. You will find us behind these 2 email addresses.
Thank you, Teresa. It was great to see the development of the project. To everyone also present today, for tomorrow we were thinking about an exercise, and we will probably use Common Garden as a platform, but more about this tomorrow. As I'm sure that people will have lots of questions, but one of the reasons I was also very interested in the project, it's the way that you approach this idea of the audience that includes chance encounters between people that might bump into each other occasionally while just watching an artwork or while walking around the space, and the fact that you're actually thinking about the architecture of the space in a way that I think it's kind of like truthful to be online and doesn't try to kind of replicate the idea of the gallery. So I just wonder if you have like anything like to say about it, like some of the experiences that you've noticed during some of the exhibition that occurred in the last past months.
I don't know, Gonzalo, if you also want to respond to this.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you for like a very, very nice presentation of the whole thing. That was very nice that you could do that. Actually, there's a quite simple thing that I can like. The first ideas that I had was kind of like to incorporate spatial audio into a kind of an online experience, but to mix like the idea of like kind of a game with the idea of seeing an exhibition like on 2D on a website. So and to have these 2 ideas merged, that was the first intent. And then when it actually happened, when that happened the first time in exhibition with Upstream, that was curated by Jan-Robert Leegte. And this was very strange because it was like beginning of lockdown. So I think the biggest shock of like not being able to be in public. And then people were running into each other at the opening, but really running into each other. And people were like hysterically running from like dot to dot and like saying hi to people and like seeing friends. And it works very nicely in conditions where you that you kind of understand, like social conditions. So you're not running into complete strangers, but there's a chance that you would recognize each other, and then you have like a first name basis. But like, for example, you meet someone called Anne, and then you would know multiple Annes, and then you say hi, and then you discover which Anne it is. But the first experience was really like we would like being on ecstasy or something, like as in it was very exhilarating, like very provide a lot of energy. And I think this also has to do with the kind of privacy aspect of like how you would be with your device and how you prepare to enter a specific space and how you see kind of a private experience and then suddenly being having like an audio connection only. So now we also have the possibility to have the video connection, so you would actually see the other person. But there was a strange, beautiful intimacy to just the audio connection, especially when there's headphones and you would be engaging a website, you would be doing something, and suddenly you see the other person, or like you hear the other person, and there's a conversation possible without pressing buttons like I want to have this conversation at this time. It's just kind of happens. This was something that you would only incorporate, like you would only, like a feeling that I only remember from like running into somebody in the street or running into somebody like on an exhibition. And this, as in like not being clear when it engages or like that it kind of surprises you. I think this is really something important to the platform and to like a social space, that you're also you're also not speaking in a way that it's being recorded all the time. So for example, of course, this is now being recorded, but if you're typing on Facebook, it's somewhat archived, potentially if you're tweeting or like, there's like the practice of people tweeting and then deleting their tweets, because it's kind of more natural that you would say something and then potentially retracting that later, or like thinking about it differently later. And like within spoken communication, of course, that's a completely different contract that we have and a completely different exchange that we have. And this approximates that kind of exchange much more. So I think this is also important to me, that there would be a social exchange possible online without documenting your words to such an extent, like almost like more a Socratic kind of approach to the idea that you don't have to write everything down to be able to communicate, but you can also have a much more informal exchange. And I think this is also much more fitting within the idea of like discussing culture or cultural gestures, that you don't immediately have to go to the aspect of writing something down, but you can have some more time to have things regurgitate and reflect on things informally. I think this is what is important for me, or what was important for me personally, to continue this endeavor and to hope that other people can use this this kind of setting or this kind of platform that we now enable.
Thank
I
you.
hope that was an answer. Yeah.
Very, very nice answer, and hello also. Does anyone have any other questions?
Yeah, I have a short question. I think it's a wonderful project. I'm really glad that it's going so well and it's been developing. I was wondering, I'm not sure I really understood well the sort of new version of distant gallery, where you hooking up like different time zones, right? So could you elaborate a little bit perhaps on how that works exactly?
Maybe I'll just like quickly reply to this too. So in principle, what I've noticed now is that there's like a lot of different cultural networks within this, let's say, the atmosphere. Like even now, if I'm logging in, I recognize several people from also like that would have less chance now to run into each other physically under these current conditions. And I think this is something which prevents certain networks from engaging with each other. And I thought, like, if you just create the same online conditions, like which previously was basically the browser, like the browser would have set this kind of framework in which people could present kind of online works, and it would always be without or within the same parameters, the same framework of a browser. Now with things, of course, like moving to apps and like all this other stuff, I thought it would be interesting to kind of see if we would have different types of online exhibitions, but that we would actually have the same kind of infrastructure or like kind of logistics for it, so that it would be using Common Garden as a platform, in principle, creating the same conditions for multiple exhibitions. So that would be, and then we would create the kind of possibility for different networks to function within the same parameters. So what if we would connect these different institutions, these different people to create exhibitions that would be positioned in a short time after each other, but they would also share kind of press, as in PR, promotion kind of resources, so that it would, for example, one exhibition or one institution would actually publish multiple shows, so that you would also see an artist or an exhibition from a place where people would maybe have less possibilities to travel, or would just have less money to travel, or would have less possibilities to travel, or would be currently in lockdown or whatever, would still have a possibility to function on the same level. And then I thought, like, it would be super nice if there's like an artist in Kinshasa or an artist in Shiraz that would maybe not have left that place yet, and would never have went to Brooklyn to meet the people from Rhizome, or never went to Manhattan to meet the Goethe Museum and casually have a coffee with the Rhizome, or went to London or went to Amsterdam, but they would still be able to engage on the same kind of institutional level, or like the same kind of, not institutional, but like the same kind of level in which like the same interaction, they would create the same exhibitions, and they would hopefully share a network. So they would be able to share each other's promotional resources. So this is, I think, why I wanted to combine a kind of incentive that would ask people actually to make exhibitions on Common Garden, but also share each other's resources. And I still have the hope that there would be a possibility that you would just, it would be easier to, for people to show their work without traveling, or like having to be forced to go onto commercial social media where, you know, they have to sell certain parts of their privacy to be able to gain access. Like I remember a long time ago that when I quit Facebook, I was like, people said I was very privileged to be able to leave Facebook because I already had a name that people recognized, or I had a certain amount of shows that, or people would call me established, which I've never experienced that from that perspective. But this idea of privilege did ring a bell, and I thought, like, if what, you know, like, wouldn't it be nice to create another kind of level of interaction for people to not have to give up certain value or certain things that I value highly, as in not having to be forced to get an Instagram account or a Facebook account to be able to share your work with like-minded peers. Yeah, so that's basically the incentive for Distant Gallery as well, which is related to Common Garden. So that's why it's basically interwoven.
We have a written question from Hannah, who says, thank you for the presentation, which was great. Smile. A lot of emphasis seems to be on how Common Garden facilitates social exchange between audience. But I was wondering if you could talk a little more about how Common Garden accommodates artworks.
Well, I think I was also very interested in the social interaction on Common Garden because I think it's also part of curating, right? Now we are talking about what does it mean to curate, but I think that when you do a show in a physical space, you also, through the architecture, you kind of divide the audience, or you can also shape the social interaction. So I think it's, for me, part of curating is also what kind of opportunity you give people to interact with the artwork. So that's probably why I mainly focus on that part. But in terms of how to incorporate artworks in Common Garden, as I said, there are many different pre-made tools, how you can actually upload images, how you can show images in slideshows, or how you can embed videos. But that's not really limited to that. You can, because through the iframe, you can embed interactive art pieces that are somewhere online. You can really like put something in a smaller frame inside of the bigger exhibition. So of course, someone could say, this is not the right way to look on net art, because when you look on net art, you should go somewhere and be on that website. But this website is incorporated in Common Garden. So you have something in between, seeing it put in a space, but also being able to interact with it in that iframe. Of course, Common Garden, as other online projects, is limited to a screen, which is 2D, which is two-dimensional space. So anything that's physically 3D, as sculptures or paintings, you kind of need to think about how you want to represent in Common Garden in a way to be somewhere in the spectrum between, is this a documentation, is this a presentation, representation? But what I think is possible in Common Garden is that the visitors are able to distinguish between these modes of presentation or representation, between, is this actually the artwork, which is kind of as in the window, as we already heard, this idea of a window on your screen that you can look through on an artwork, or is this actually like an exhibition view which is embedded here? You know, we also I helped create some exhibitions that were based on physical exhibitions, so you need to start to think about these issues. Or do you want to show each piece of this collection here, or do you want to just show one wall of the whole collection as a one photography? So I think these questions that are very very specific for online curating are also true for Common Garden, just because Common Garden has a good balance between the immediacy and the tools and like the openness and the actual closeness of what you can do. I think it makes it a little bit easier to understand this process from translation from the artworks in online environment.
Actually, can I just or like I think that's a great answer, but then from I think what to complement that, I think the very first, I think Teresa also mentioned this, like one of the first iterations of the project was with Project for Temporary Stedelijk, which was by Amber van den Edening and Kalle, and I think this is where well, a very first idea for that was also that when a work enters the screen, let's say, then it starts to load, let's say, and then it's loaded on your screen. And actually, when you scroll away from it, it's offloaded, so it doesn't become like a heavy website. So in principle, that principle already works with like having being able to put multiple works in one context in one website. But what was important for me there too was the conversations I've had with a lot of online presentations where you just see one single work. So you would actually click a link or you would engage with one single work, and that's the work that you would communicate or that you would actually see. Well, actually in exhibitions or many exhibition spaces, you wouldn't go to an exhibition to just see one work. There's multiple works mostly, and there's also a possibility that one work or the context of a work or the impression or even the sound or the audio or even the light of a projector or whatever interferes with the way that you would engage with another work. And this is quite normal, and this is also part of the curation, I think, in which sense one work disturbs or complements or whatever. There's a friction between these works, and that's something which was very hard to engage with in online platforms because it was mostly these single works within a certain context. So this is something I wanted to emphasize, that it would be possible to have multiple works next to each other. And I think this is something which can easily be done in Common Garden because you can simply scroll from one to the other, and there's a possibility to have works in view at the same time. And I think this is because of that scrolling, and this is something that Jonas made the very first made the script for, which was the kind of like the whole thing that made this possible in the first instance. With this idea that you would actually be able to create like a large collection of works, but you would only load the thing that you would be looking at the moment. So there would be a piece by Jody that would create like noise and create like kind of a drag on the CPU and therefore influence the way that you would see the work next to it. But if you move away from it, then you actually don't hear it anymore, and you actually, as if you're really navigating a kind of physical space. So for example, there's been ideas too that a lot of users, because they're used to the idea of like how they use things on the internet, they would want to have a volume button next to the video, which I've always thought was very extreme, because in a physical space you would never have a volume button to turn down the volume of a screening that you're seeing. You would just say like, if you want to have a conversation with someone, you would walk away from that space. You would have a quiet place where you would maybe have a conversation. So there's a kind of nice interchange there where I am kind of more on the spectrum of like having it much more like an exhibition within a physical space, as in that the work is kind of, that you really go and engage with the work, and other people would still incorporate, like see it as a kind of like a social space. So I think there's a very nice tension there, which is part of then the curation of like how you approach this space and what kind of position do you provide the work. For example, can you pause the work? If you do a tour, for example, can the curator, when they walk by everything, can they actually switch off all the works? There's been a feature which I was very proud of, is that actually if you see a YouTube or a Vimeo video, everybody would be watching the same part of the video at the same time. So you would actually be as if you're in a physical space. You're actually just seeing the exact same part instead of having your own private version of the video on your client side. So these kind of things have been very interesting to develop, and I think this is also part of like how this engagement, let's say, with the work takes place. And I think this is actually, Teresa, I think what you said was very nice. I never thought of it that way exactly, in the sense that it as a kind of a more, also brings a more natural way to see it, like to kind of understand if it's a representation or if it's the work itself, and especially because it changes. For example, if it's an image, or sometimes when you can interact with the work, but it's not necessarily clear, because you can, certain works suddenly you can mouse over and suddenly something happens, and the full functionality of the web, as soon as it can be embedded in an HTTPS website, or can be shown on the HTTPS website, and it can be put in an iframe, you can show it on Common Garden. So a lot of these different functionalities are possible, but it's kind of interesting that it gets its own kind of exchange in how you regard a work, if it's a representation or if it's the work itself, or if it links to work. Anyway, so this is it becomes a very complex but interesting cocktail.
Thank you for that. Sorry, Teresa, in relation to that, before you were mentioning that sometimes people responding to the platform in a way that, by customizing it, creating an exhibition and customizing it, that surprised you. Is there any example that you want to give us in relation to this idea of creating different formats of display?
Sure. One of the professors in Germany actually did like a Corona project with his students during a seminar. And that was quite an interesting application of Common Garden, because basically every student made one piece of Common Garden, but they put them in a chain of gardens. So it was not just one big single website, but it was one that started it. And then we have this tool, which is called Portal, which you can just go in and you will end up in another garden. And there was another exhibition. So it was like a chain of small exhibitions. And it was very nice, because sometimes the next exhibition really like built on the previous one in terms of the narrative. Sometimes it was completely different. Sometimes you were in a white environment. It was very friendly and nice to look around, and then you ended up in this like really dark website dealing with like very traumatic topics. So I think it was really interesting to see how differently you can lay out an exhibition, not just what Constant was talking about, the one space where you can move between them, but also as a long chain of exhibitions that you can like walk through. Another curator just recently also did an exhibition which worked in the same way, and it was building up, and it was like as traveling to intestines, because that was the topic of his kind of the exhibition. So I think it's just interesting to see what people actually focus on, and what like one part of Common Garden people use and like really push forward or develop or work around. So that was interesting.
So the next presentation, which is also the final one for this section, is by Sebastian Schmieg. Schmieg's work investigates the algorithmic circulation of images, text, and bodies. He creates playful interventions that penetrate the shiny surfaces of our network society and explore the realities that lie behind them. And I will let you unmute myself, Sebastian, and I'll let you start.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thank you for having me. And I'm gonna share my screen and present a project, which is called Gallery Delivery. But before I introduce Gallery Delivery, I wanted to briefly talk about, like, I have a couple of themes that I explore in my practice, but one thing that is related or out of which Gallery Delivery was born is this concept of humans as software extensions. I wanted to just briefly bring that up because I think it helps to understand where I come from with this. And with this humans as software extensions, what I mean is that so we often imagine, you know, like media extensions of body, but in this context, bodies extend software. So for example, what we have up here in the top right corner is like a lady delivering food, which is in the end just an extension of an app and an algorithm guiding her, or like when we order something online and it's being delivered. So it's just like bodies or minds that extend software, which is then like for the people working under these conditions means kind of like algorithmic management and all the stuff that comes with it. But on the other hand, for those who use these software extensions, it means that these people, bodies, functionalities, program bodies are really easily available, just like with a click of a button or like a tap on your phone. And so it's this promise of like immediacy and frictionless and control that you can then apply to bodies. So yeah, like with this photo I took of an advertisement at a metro station where you don't even really see a body, it's just like the hand coming out of your phone that then irons your clothes. And here I wouldn't consider this person like in the narrow sense to be a human as a software extension, but you can then see that, yeah, there are weird situations that are created where it's more like cheaper and more easier to have somebody walking around with a television screen on their body than have maybe a self-driving TV. So it's in the end like the body becomes easily programmable and it's like better than a robot or another computer or something. And out of this comes the project Gallery Delivery, which I started in 2018, but it's also still running or running again. I can talk about that later maybe. And to introduce it, I will show a few images that I had created when I introduced the project and then I used on Instagram to advertise it, because it's runs a bit as a business, so advertising plays kind of a big role in it. So what is Gallery Delivery? Basic premise is it's an exhibition that you order online, but it's delivered by a bicycle courier to your apartment where it's installed temporarily. So first thing is you go to a website, which is gallery.delivery, you order it, you enter your address. In the beginning, it was in Berlin. You pick a date and a time. So you say, okay, I want to see the exhibition tomorrow at 5 p.m., for example. And then you have to pay a little fee for the courier so that he can cycle to your apartment and stay there. And once it's time, the courier comes to your apartment and really sets up the exhibition. It's like always between 8 and maybe 12, 13 pieces and puts them up on the wall, and you can then look at the exhibition. So that is kind of the content of one of the bags that were used with the exhibition inside of it, but it's of course then taken out and he sets it up. And yeah, it's called Gallery Delivery. So it really comes with this aspect of that, yeah, you can also buy the artworks. So all the artworks that are up on the wall or somewhere installed in the apartment, you can buy if it's not an expensive artwork right there, like just with cash, or you can kind of like have it delivered later by mail if it's a big one and you have to pay a bit more. And once it's over, the courier just packs everything back into the backpack after maybe an hour and then cycles on maybe to the next exhibition. And so where does this come from, and what happens here is that to me it was really interesting. Like we are talking about like curating online, showing work online, but this is actually a physical exhibition. But what I'm attempting here is, if you look at all these delivery apps and so on, like in the beginning, you would, let's say, download an image if you wanted to have something, or a PDF, and then you can follow a status bar with like download 50%, 70%, and so on. But this thing has now really also been applied to bodies and workers. And so you can sit there and control the cyclist bringing food or whatever you ordered online to your home. But only for a brief moment that body actually materializes outside the screen, hands over the food, or now with Corona, often the promise is you don't even have to see or kind of touch the person, and that's it, and then they're gone. But the idea with gallery delivery is that actually the courier enters the apartment and is not just there to install the exhibition, but actually the courier is there. So the body materializes and you not only spend time with the artworks, but also with the courier. I mean, one rule here was always, if people photographed him, he had to be anonymized. That was his wish. He didn't want to end up everywhere on photos, but still you are there. You can talk to the courier. If you're interested, you can talk to him about what it means to be like a bicycle courier, or you just talk about artworks, whatever. It's really up to you. But it's happening in an intimate space of your apartment. So it has a very specific setting for that. And yeah, once he opens the bag, it gets messy and he converts the apartment in a way, which is totally different to what you experience in a white cube, where the rule basically is all kind of like labor has to be invisible. Like all the interns, all the art handlers, everything has to leave the space. What has to be there and focused on is the artwork, whereas here it's like the courier is kind of the centerpiece of the exhibition, doing his thing. And the thing he is doing is really trying to install a show in a space he didn't know beforehand. So here we see an example where he was trying to install some prints on some wood that was standing around there, or I like this one in particular, where he found these two tubes in which there are tennis balls, and he put the tiny projector that was in the bag on it and projected an animated GIF by Olya Lialina here, and they sit there, and to me it's kind of funny. So I like this one. But also the courier became part of the art itself that artists put into the bag. So this is a piece by Nadja Buttendorf, in which she asked the courier for the time of the exhibition, which at that point was 10 days in which you could order the exhibition, to glue a nail to his, a hook to his fingernail. And then every time the exhibition was ordered, he not only put up the artworks, but he also put up himself, nailed himself to the wall and exhibited himself, which I thought was a very nice gesture. And then, of course, people take photos of this. And in the end, you can buy that little hook and restage that performance yourself. And the whole thing kind of becomes this, like people often order when they have dinner with friends, and so it becomes like a thing to come together and talk and look at the art and so on. But I didn't curate all of the shows, but when I curate the show, what I pay attention to is that it's often artworks that either work very well in like an apartment setting, or that it is something that you can interact with directly. So this piece by Grażyna Roguski is it's a modified T-shirt, which then people could also try on. I mean, we didn't know if they could try on. They just did it, and she said, and it's okay that they did it. But to me, that was important to have these kind of things that are close to you. Just to give you a very brief overview of very few artworks. So it goes really from like, this is an automated computer mouse, basically, that takes over your computer. So if you say, I want to see the piece, you have to risk that this automated mouse might delete something on your computer. So you have some risk, to really like medium-wise, very simple artworks. This is like a score which you rip to make music by David Helbig. So it's really, you can do it yourself, or you can have the courier perform it. There's stuff that interacts with your apartment. There's a projector that I showed before. Easy stuff like a sticker, complicated stuff like an elaborated screen. So it's really many different things, but always, and this is, I mean, to me, it was the first time I curated, but also curated in a very specific way, because the exhibition kind of has a maximum size and a maximum weight. Otherwise, it doesn't fit into the bag, or the courier says, look, it's too heavy, which he said, I can't really deliver this. It's just too much. And as you've seen so far, I've often used screenshots from Instagram, because the thing gallery delivery is a physical exhibition, but I think it's at least as important is the aspect that happens online, which is actually mostly through Instagram, that people take photos of what is happening and post it online. And I think this is also nicely exemplified here by the piece by Elisa Giardina Papa, with this Photoshop brush stroke that was delivered and that you could hold up in front of your face or wherever, and then post it back to Instagram, and you have this like translation. You order it online, it comes to your space, you take a picture of it, upload it again, and there are these layers, and in the end it's like Photoshop. And then speaking about the where, like, in what time it happened and what aesthetic I chose to use. Of course, I think everybody is aware what the problematic things that come with these humans as software extensions, or this food delivery in particular, badly paid, unstable, and so on and so on. And that was, of course, something that I reacted to, but made the conscious decision to go for like an aesthetic and also a setup that kind of embraces this delivery format and also the aesthetic, and not just do that in an ironic way, but to really take it seriously. So that is like advertisement I used. The website is kind of like hip, and you order it online and it's all automated, and you get this like nicely designed price list when you get the exhibition. There is like online stuff, like I come to that later, maybe to speak first about the reason why I chose to make it this way is because to me it was important to make it as open as possible for many audiences. So some people order it because they think, okay, this is just great, I don't have to leave, I'm at home with my kids, but I want to see art and just order it. And it also appeals to like startup-y people maybe, which I think is totally fine and good, because the critique that is also to me embedded in the piece doesn't have to be so like directly. It really either like there is some critique you sense or you don't. To me, it's both fine. But I wanted to have this door opener and to really say, okay, I let this person into my home and I want to spend time with him. And I think that was necessary to do in such a way. And also to me to understand, what does it mean to kind of run this startup-y thing? And I also understood it really in relationship to the other delivery services. So for example, to advertise it, I used this video, which I'm showing 3 stills from, like started with Deliveroo might have left Berlin and its riders, but gallery delivery is back. And I thought it was really funny that at some point, at least in Berlin, almost all delivery services had died. I mean, new ones are back now, but it seemed like gallery delivery had survived, which I thought was kind of funny, even though, of course, I was also running this thing at a loss. I didn't make much profit with this. And yeah, I'm also almost coming to the end. I started doing this in 2018. It was called, the first exhibition was called Grand Rollout, happened here in Berlin for 10 days, together with Birch, a Zurich-based gallery. And I didn't intend this to happen several times, but it worked quite well. And I realized it's not just a one-time thing, but it's an exhibition format and a performance format. So I did it several times, but starting in end of 2019, beginning of 2020, I realized that I also wanted to do it more like a franchise way. So first one was together with Green Cube Gallery, where I was more like helping them with the infrastructure. I provided them with a website, I sent them the bag, and I told them what kind of artworks work well and what doesn't work so well, and what I don't want to have associated maybe with it. But somebody else, Silvio Russo, curated the show, so I didn't really do too much with it. Same happened now after Corona, or not after Corona, but after we kind of accepted it's gonna stay, maybe. I'm a bit ahead living in the future, maybe already here. And it happened with Axioma and also in Spain. And what I meant here with after Corona was that the edition in Milan, it kind of reached into the beginning of Corona. And for me, that was like, okay, it's over because nobody's ever going to have like somebody you don't know come into your apartment and feel comfortable with them. But then especially people from Axioma said, look, we think it's right for this moment because everybody's home. And if we do it the right way, actually can also speak to this moment, which in the end, I think was true and worked out quite well. And very last thing I wanted to show is that what it also does is that basically I'm running a gallery without having to pay for a physical exhibition space, but I'm using physical exhibition space, which I think is also this, like, riders have to use their own bikes and so on and so on. It's all in these startup logics to like externalize all the costs to somewhere else. And it's kind of the same here, but it's turned around in this like proud moment of being a gallery delivery host, and you get in the end this little certificate signed by the courier that you hosted the exhibition, which I think in the end, if you think about it, if you want to exhibit 10 artists and they're like, let's say some of them were quite established artists, you would have to pay a lot of money to artist fees, whereas like she had to pay 20 euro and had an exhibition of all these artists at home. So I think it's also a good deal, kind of. Yeah, and then that's the end when it's over. He leaves and it's the end. Yeah, thank you. That was the introduction to gallery delivery.
Thank you very much for this great presentation. I mean, as a maybe background story to your project and the reason I wanted to invite you, I remember when I started the archive curating online and, thinking about curating on the web, I kept on thinking, why do I keep on looking at gallery delivery? Because, as you said, it's not a web project. I mean, it's not exactly maybe what, 10 years ago I considered, curating on the web browser, or like thinking about the window, or thinking about the space. But it started to be, I think for me, it's very representative also of maybe also even what Teresa was talking about in constant, this shift that is happening. So the environment is changed. We have apps, we have very specific private platforms that we are constantly using, and gallery delivery reflects on it by, thinking about the process, like even what you were saying when I interviewed you, like this idea of thinking about how can you move a body with the click of a button. But then the part that I also find interesting is that as you were showing some of the artworks, yes, they are physical, they exist in an apartment, but then they become something else when they are on social media. And it just keeps on, it's kind of like very representative, I think, of this kind of like circulation of content, like even in the process like of curating online and dealing with audiences. So this is not a question, it's more like to explain why I was really keen on you talking about this project for this seminar. If anyone has any question, please feel free. Otherwise, I have a few.
Yeah, I have a question too, actually. So thank you, Sebastian. I'm really fond of this project. I've been a gallery host myself in the Milan edition, just before actually the national lockdown. So the evening before it was announced, I had a small gathering of people in my apartment, and it felt really powerful to be living this moment and experiencing this project, and then subsequently also my perception of my own environment and the way I was paying attention to all sorts of details of my domesticity in the first lockdown. I think it was somehow also impacted by the project. But my questions are, I mean, given the centrality of the role of the courier, which I absolutely experience myself as being actually the performance of the project, how do you go about recruiting them in a sense? From what I understood, they're kind of art students, but that part of the project is never too discussed in a sense. So I'm curious about that. And also the other part, the other question, which is a bit more provoking, is why the fee of 20 euro? I mean, why this very small fee? You said you almost went into a kind of entrepreneurial approach to the project. Why don't think bigger, or why keeping, the cost so low in a sense?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, first of all, it's great to hear that you got to experience that exhibition in Milan. So the courier, it depends a bit on who does it, but the idea is that it actually should be somebody who works as a courier outside of gallery delivery. So for example, you have these shifts of or like things come together in a nice way when it's like an actual courier. First of all, you can talk to an actual courier. Otherwise, it would be like, if I did it, it would be like me pretending to be somebody I'm not, and I couldn't talk about these things. But also then stuff happens, like, for example, when I talked to the courier here in Berlin, when the whole thing was over and he was back to delivering for, I think it was Deliveroo or something like this. He said, look, I just delivered a burger to somebody who last week ordered the exhibition. And I thought it was also very nice to still have him circulate there. But like that one in particular was a friend of Constant, whom I got to know through Jonas Lund. So it's all these connections. Luckily, he was like, he studied art, he was delivering food, and so that was a perfect match. And he's a super nice guy, because if it's not a nice person, it becomes a bit difficult. And when I did it, another one I did like recently here in Germany, in Osnabrück, it was through a local exhibition space, and they recruited the courier. And what they did is they told me they just went to a place where they knew there were many of them hanging out, and they said, look, we need somebody to deliver an exhibition. And that's how it started. And luckily it was a super nice guy, like very interested and interesting guy. That was a lot of luck. So that is the idea with the courier. And second question, why is the fee so small? So the fee, at least in Berlin, it was small, and in Osnabrück as well. The idea is it should be the barrier should be as low as ordering a pizza, at least to me. So if it becomes too expensive, on the one hand, I don't think it addresses the right audience. And on the other hand, it looks very easy. Yeah, you order it, but I realized it takes some effort to get people to order it. So it takes them. So I think having a small fee is the right thing for that, like really strategically. At the same time, it covers the cost of the courier, and I'm not making a profit with this thing. Like I'm kind of getting through it.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for answering. Yeah, and also I do agree the kind of price really is the right price, because it's accessible in a sense. But I was curious to just poke you on this bit, considering also what you said of the project reaching various audiences, also maybe towards the startup world and all of these. I had a curiosity around like that aspect. But thank you, and thanks for your talk.
In terms of the idea of the franchise, do you have people or organizations contacting you, or do you reach out with people, or do you have future plans on how to take it forward?
It was always that people contacted me if we wanted to do it together or do it. And then really depending on the circumstances, I said, look, maybe it's better as a franchise because it takes so much energy, which I don't want to always invest myself. And you have a local infrastructure, which I don't. Let's maybe do it in that way. And which I think was a good decision. And future plans, there might be one this year here in Germany, but I'm not pushing it. Let's put it that way, because it's I have done a few and I'm really happy always doing it, because also like being in contact with the artists, curating and all that, but it also it's like setting up a proper exhibition.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Sebastian? Well, we have a comment from Rebecca who says that is brilliant. Exhibition 1 week and burger the next.
Yeah, maybe I can add this. To me, the most rewarding part and most fun part of it was each night sitting down with the courier and like reliving his day. And he was just talking to me and telling me, okay, I was invited to this party and I got drunk a bit myself and I almost forgot this piece. And then I went there and these people were nice. And it was really like being with him almost. And that was, for me, really a rewarding part.
Yeah, there's also something that I really like about this project, that you stress that not only you're entering people's kind of like private spaces, but also you put them in the position of actually opening up the house, like to not only art, but like someone else, like that usually is not involved in the process. So I find it quite beautiful. So Annet Dekker is a curator and researcher. She's an assistant professor of media studies, archival and information studies at the University of Amsterdam, and visiting professor and co-director of the Center for the Study of the Network Image at the London South Bank University. I think we've seen, Annet, many interesting examples today of how complex is archiving curatorial projects online. Although we had some amazing presentation like the one by Field Broadcast that actually also showed us the background, behind the scenes story of a project. So I'll let you start and then I will follow along.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Marialaura, for inviting me. And yeah, thanks so much for the other speakers. Yeah, more and more I think like, oh my God, there's so much interesting stuff happening. I don't know where to start. So for now, I will start by just sharing my screen. Blah, blah, blah. To my little presentation thingy. Yeah, I think this works. It will take a while before my computer actually knows what I'm doing, but hopefully you'll see the right stuff at the moment. Yeah, so Marialaura asked me to talk a little bit about a project that we actually did, most of it together in a sense. And before I start really talking about the broken timeline as such, I thought it would be good to give you a bit of background on why I started this project, because it's been a while in a way in the making. More than 10 years, actually. So my initial motivation was based very much on a frustration I had at a time more than 10 years ago. Pretty much, at that time, I worked, yeah, I don't know, about 10 years or so, a decade or so, as a curator of digital art. And there were still, you know, a lot of digital art and exhibitions that we organized, both international as well as in Amsterdam, where I was based. And however, though, the whole discussion kind of got stuck when it came to, well, what is digital art and where are the museums? What are they doing with the digital art? So, yeah, I started talking to this about with a friend of mine as well, Angela Plouman at the time. She was director of Baltan. And we thought it would be quite interesting to hear indeed from the museums. It's like, well, you know, what's happening, you know, when are you going to pick this up? And how do you see these different arts now together in a way? And we were triggered by a question actually that was posed in a sort of workshop conference organized by a Viennese curatorial collective Context in August in 2011 at a book launch. They posed this question: why is it still easier to get an entire museum collection on the internet than to get a single work of internet-based art in a museum space? So that became in a way the sort of trigger for us, like, okay, well, let's see what we can do with it. And so we organized this working conference in 2011, 2012, together with Baltan. Angela had actually left, and Olga Mink, who's now still director of Baltan, continue with me on this adventure. And we organized it together with the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven. And we were particularly interested in the following, as I've quoted here, as well, the history of art has taught us art can only be understood in the wider context of society that produces it. Digital art says a lot about contemporary society and how it's changing, as is evidence when it's addressed in relation to established art histories. Yet many curators still find it difficult to distinguish artistic merit from technical experimentation or innovation in digital art. So if the museum's job is not only to think about the past, but also to celebrate what's most vital and relevant now, then the internet cannot be ignored as a valid location and focus for artistic practice. So as a prelude in a way to this conference, this working conference, in which we invited both digital art curators, but also more conventional art curators from the museum to discuss with each other and participants as well about this issue. As a prelude to get people excited about it, in a way, I did a series of interviews with, at the top, what I thought at the time were really interesting young curators, researchers who were doing a lot of stuff, both online and offline, and who, you know, at least to me, they seemed not to care anymore. Well, what is the art? It's just art. It's not either digital, net art, internet art, or contemporary art. It's just all art. So we made this little website to collect all these interviews and also some of the events that we organized. I asked all the interviewees the same series of questions. So I thought it was quite a good, you know, research tool to gather information on different ways of thinking about digital curating. And it was also a way of sort of charting the field, as the answers showed very much actually the diversity in the different approaches. And as I said, the interviews were initially all posted on this website. Interestingly, though enough, and the interviews disappeared almost as quickly as some of the works that we discussed online as well. There's some of the last remainders in a way are screenshots like these, but luckily also the Wayback Machine actually recovered quite a bit of it, albeit in a very different layout, of course. But that's something to discuss potentially later at a later stage. And more relevant for today, I think as well, is that their responses to my first question indeed about terminology, as I already alluded to, it turned out that no one was really interested in discussing this discussion. Well, what is digital art, or how do you think about that? What was once actually quite important, I think, to comprehend the sort of aesthetics and also dynamics of the artworks, or just to differentiate one from the other, traditional art forms, now seems almost completely irrelevant. And instead, these curators, they prefer to draw a historical line with existing art movements, such as conceptual art, Dada, minimalism, you name it. So in the end, they opted for their work to be described as contemporary art, or just simply art, as I mentioned. I found their attitude actually quite liberating, not having to deal with the struggle of belonging to a certain category, movement, or genre, not having to defend digital art as being as valuable as any art form, nor having to argue for it to even to be considered as art. It was just art. So we did these book speculative scenarios after the conference, in which I used some of their quotes, but yeah, most of the interviews just were gone basically. I got an email from one of the curators, Domenico Coranta, I think it was 2 years after the event, and he asked me, he's like, well, we did this great interview, but I can't find it anymore online. Do you know what happened? Is the website still on, or is the content still there? So I started digging through my files and noticing quite quickly, indeed, the website's not online anymore. With the change of directors, the website had also changed, and this particular part of the website was lost in that process of translation, as many things do. But I digged in the corners of my computer and found some of the interviews back, and it was really interesting actually to me to read them after 2 years. And I thought, like, quite some interesting things have been said there, and that's where I left it. Then after a couple of years, I once again looked back at them for some reason. And I also noticed some other project that happened online and that started and was mostly actually triggered by the work that Gaia had done as a PhD student at that time. And so I was also starting to look back again. It's like, yeah, actually what's going on at the moment? What does curating in this online environment, this changing environment mean today? And I saw some really interesting projects and people emerging as well. And so I thought, like, okay, well, let's do another, batch of interviews with these people and see what they are saying then. And so every couple of years, in a way, when I had some time at my hands, I started sending out this questionnaire to people and hoping for them to respond. And so it was in 2019 when I said, like, okay, well, I've got about like 25 interviews, 20 something interviews, and maybe I should do something with it. And first of all, I thought, like, oh, I could just post them online. And then it's like, yeah, maybe they need a bit more context. And so I approached this publisher in Amsterdam, Valise, whom I had published a book with before. And they were really interested, actually, a bit to my surprise, in a sense, because you kind of always undervalue your own work, in a sense. So they were really like, yeah, let's have a look at it, and are definitely interested in making this publication for you. So that was really nice, and it was really interesting. So I was just, collating all the information, looking back, copy editing some of the interviews, and it was almost done in a way. And then COVID happened. And so there was this lockdown, and all of a sudden there was this rush of all kinds of things happening online, and just drove me crazy pretty much. And I was like, oh my God, there's all these things happening online now. And what do I do with it? I'm just making this compilation of the interviews. I need to, get on with it and ask some more people. And so I decided to indeed do a little bit more, but also finish the book, because I was also like, yeah, this needs to get out there. It seems to be the right moment. So in the end, 27 interviews, which were great, and which gives an amazing overview in a way of a decade of online exhibiting and discussing the issue of, well, what does it mean actually to this, to present and digital art, and both online and also offline. Now, I was luckily helped when doing the final copy edits by with Gaia here as well, and she helped me finish it off in a sense. And with this whole online movement all of a sudden, and all these exhibitions popping up out of nowhere, we also thought, like, well, What's actually, what's this history, because as mentioned before, actually with Teresa as well said, there was all these things happening, but they were all quite, traditional, conventional, following sort of standard, which there really wasn't, but still, it seemed all to be quite conventional and established standards almost, following the same sort of spaces and aesthetics of the offline world. A lot of the galleries just indeed mimicked what they've been doing for many years in physical spaces. And so together with Gaia, we also started looking primarily like, okay, well, what's happened already now? What kind of history do we have of all these online exhibitions that have been taking place, and how can we maybe assemble them and show what has actually happened already, and show the world indeed, well, there is quite a bit of history. And then Gaia happened to mention, in a way, it's like, well, you should talk to Marialaura, because she's been doing this PhD and she has actually quite a timeline already. And so we got together, the three of us, and started thinking indeed, like, yeah, what do we have together? And Marialaura, being quite an advocate for Excel formats, opened this lovely Excel timeline tab for us. And so we started filling it more and more. And at a certain moment, we're also like, yeah, okay, we've got this amazing list of, I don't know how many projects we came up with in the end, but a few hundreds for sure. And next to that, we also thought like, well, it could be, interesting to show a bit more of the context on how these exhibitions were actually developed in a way. And even though this was never really a one-on-one translation in the environment in which they were taking place, we did think what was happening in this sort of socio-technical world would actually also be quite relevant to understand also the exhibitions that were developed. And so we also made this sort of like, socio-technical timeline of things that we thought was actually quite important to realize. So we came up with the idea of the broken timeline. And actually this is the current moment, what to sort of look at, a sort of website that we're trying to bring out with Valis. It shows a sort of historical exhibition project that were curated online. It's very partial, it's very subjective, and it goes back in time to present this lineage of web-based curatorial projects. Often ones that are, unseen, neglected, or ignored by mainstream art worlds and their discourses. So when doing this whole, list this in Google Excel, it's actually quite nice to do because you don't really have to think. But, when actually looking at the data that we collated, it was like, well, we need to come up with some criteria to make actually sense of what we're doing. And so the criteria that we came up with are the following. There's, okay, out of the list that we've, accumulated, we wanted to prioritize those projects that are web specific. So that either use this quite an intricate navigation of the web, interaction modes, or completely misuse existing platforms, such as the X-Range project that we came across already today. We also wanted to disregard exhibitions that follow the conventional logic of the vitrine. So the sort of like gallery display of straightforward display, and focus on attempts that challenge how online is also experienced. So I think the Common Garden here is a wonderful example in that sense. We also excluded collaborative projects that resemble artworks. So yeah, it's a very fuzzy boundary we quite quickly acknowledged at the same time, because a lot of artists do actually quite interesting exhibitions. And hence we also indeed came into discussion of, well, what is gallery delivery here? Is it an art project? Is it an exhibition performance, a platform, potential, whatever? So this was one of the things that we started discussing about. And in that sense, also, these criteria became a sort of discussion tools in a way as well, potentially at least. A bit more indeed about then what is the broken timeline? Well, broken clearly, many links of the historical project don't function anymore. And then you get redirected to this 404 now found message, right? although, I mean, surprisingly, and now working with Valis to actually make this online website happen, a surprising amount actually do still work and are still visible. I think in the end, we had a list of about 250 exhibitions that we selected to be in the book and online. And as only 5% that are actually not functioning anymore. So that to me was really a surprise as well. Now, the other sense of brokenness was the role of the curator. And this is coming back indeed of the idea of the complex relation between the human behavior and machinic processes that are happening online. And how there is this deeply evolving social technical ecosystem that Gaia actually was also talking about when she presented today. And it doesn't, become always clear anymore who or what is driving a project, what shapes the function, the tasks and the values of curating here. And then the broken also, signals in a way this sort of the non-bridge in a way, this sort of digital divide, as it's sometimes called, or the gap between digital art and contemporary art, which we still, see today as well, I think. And finally, also broken in the sense like, okay, you're not in control of everything, next to our own sort of subjective bias that we had, a lot of things indeed are beyond your control. So what do you do about that? So perhaps to conclude indeed, because I don't want to make it too lengthy in a sense, the book is there, it was quite interesting in a way. I mean, also Sebastian talking about Instagram and how documentation gets a second life. It's really interesting also to follow the publication of this book in that sense, because once it came out and, you start talking about that online and particularly on Instagram, the book was sold out within 2 months. And I do think that's the first time that ever happened to me. And I think it will definitely be the last time as well. But yeah, with this list of people, already being quite present online and them tweeting or whatever, posting about it, made it circulate quite quickly. And something else I think could be interesting indeed to discuss. So my interest in doing this book basically, and the timeline particularly even more so, was really to see how these web-based practices challenge certain established values, of galleries, of exhibitions in museum, etc. But also how to work through alternative ways of understanding art stewardship, cultural curatorial authority, and public access. And I think it's really interesting now to be 2 years in lockdown, basically, and to see 2 years ago, everything was popping up like crazy. And now it seems we've ended up in a dead land, that no one really wants to do anything online anymore, except us, of course. So we're still here. And we still want to discuss and we still want to hear your views. And I think it's actually quite a good moment as well to look back and reflect on what's happened actually the last 2 years. And what kind of things can we learn from that? And how can we start thinking indeed about, well, how do we archive all this beautiful information that we have to make it still also relevant and visible to those who are, have not experienced. And I think, again, we saw some really interesting insight in that today already in the projects. So I'm really curious also, how this will develop and particularly tomorrow morning as well, how we can discuss this more. So I'll leave it at that and stop my screen share. Okay.
Thank you, Annet, for this story. I'll just add something quite shortly. 1 second, I have to share my screen. Which is, of course, related to the event we are doing today. I just wanted to say a few words about the project Curated.online, which is, I mean, I call it an ongoing research space because it's an archiving process, which I'm mostly using to try to make sense of this field of practice and maybe to try to map projects beyond what Annet was saying, my love for Excel files, for organizing things. And the project was also related to what I was saying at the beginning. I wanted to try to find a way of, and also what Annet was saying, to try to look at the development of curatorial work online in relationship to the technological infrastructure in which it takes place. And so the website is constituted by a few different sections, and one of them is the index, which was very much inspired by an earlier project by Silvio Lorusso, which was called, I think it's still on live, the Post-Digital Publishing Archive. And the index presents projects. I mean, the projects can be searched according to the curators, their title, the type of intervention, the technological infrastructure. And this I wanted to try to find a way of like discussing the curatorial strategies that I've been looking at online in relation to the technology adopted. And in this way, I would say this structure would allow me to kind of like see clusters of projects, but not just across, not chronologically, but across time. But in a sense, it also, while I was doing it, it also started to be quite limiting in that it was only kind of like looking at the technology. So I decided to add descriptions of the infrastructure used with some facts which were related to their development. And I can kind of like wanted to guide myself, but also the viewer, to think about what lies behind the services that are ready to use and we find online, like in the case that you see here of Delicious, which is something that I found was a common trait of like projects online that were actually responding to the commercialization of platforms. Then I also started to use keywords to try to find a different way of clustering them, to kind of like hint at the cultural context that kind of like envelopes the technologies, the devices, the apparatuses that we use, as in the instance of the desktop. So this was a way to try to guide myself, but also the viewer, although this is very subjective, to have a different approach to reading curatorial projects online. And this is an entry which is dedicated to desktop. The archiving progress, I mean, Curating.online includes also interviews I conducted so far with the curators of some of the projects that are archived. And maybe as you've seen today, most of the curators are actually very often artists. But I also started to add interviews with designers, researchers, and anthropologists to try to kind of like look at the context in which we are living and in which these projects have been produced. And I hope to, with time, to conduct more interviews. The interviews helped me to understand the process and intent behind the projects better, as well as like to confront a question that became very complex to ask, which I had when I started this project, which was like during the pandemic. One of them was actually asking about the people I interview about the end of or the death of curatorial work on the web, and asking them what's today's web. And luckily, the responses of the people I interviewed were actually more optimistic than my assumptions. And this is a screenshot of an interview with Sebastian Schmieg. One other intent with the project was also to include a section that was dedicated to resources where I could actually collect, like almost create a repository of writing that was published about curating on the web and online project. So I gathered a list of texts that have been published. And yeah, if you have like any writing or text to contribute, I would be like very interesting to actually hear your suggestion. And as Annette was saying, the difficulties within an archive is also like to keep up with time and keep them alive. And the fact that they're also quite subjective, but the intent behind this website was actually to try to create or to offer like a useful base for thinking about this field of work. And this is the end of the presentation. We are very happy to take, we are almost, I mean, we've been here for a long time, but we're also happy to take final questions you might have about archiving.
I have a short question. Do you have a particular technique how you collect data for your archives, for your book projects? And how do you deal with the restrictions of internet as a global tool? Because when I had tried to research on exhibitions, I always found it very difficult to look outside of kind of the language barriers. Like I can only research in English, I can only research in German. And then when I'm somewhere else in another country, the search engine will behave differently. So do you have some strategies how to deal with the restrictiveness of the internet?
No. I mean, I think I can be quite blunt in that sense. It's like, no, I don't. It's that's why it was super, important for us as well to acknowledge, well, this is a very subjective project, right? Between us, we had like 5 different languages that we could choose from. But nevertheless, that leaves out quite a large portion of the earth in that sense. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems in a way, that the internet, is still, so small in many ways, while it's so wide. And we are all in our little gardens, in a sense, to use that metaphor. But there's so much more out there. And that's also, one of the reasons that we wanted to have the website, actually, the Broken Timeline, as soon as possible online. But it takes longer than we expected. And again, there's a lot of restrictions within that site as well. And we hope it will reach enough people indeed to become larger. But it's a lot of time and effort to actually make that work. And I think, well, there were also, examples in the past that I quickly glossed over in a way. And they're facing the same problem in a way. It's like, how can you make it more sustainable? How can you make it more inclusive? And those are the 2 questions, I think, that are most relevant at the moment. It's like, well, what does it actually mean when we speak about it in that way? But,
Yeah, I second that. For the project Curating Online, the way that the projects are archived in the index is like very partial. It almost, there are images, screenshots, 3 screenshots of the project, the text that was used to present the project, and a link to the website. Which, if you think of most of the projects that we have seen today, from field broadcast, but also gallery delivery, or even like distant gallery, it's a screenshot doesn't absolutely tell anything. That's also the reason why I wanted to have the interviews, because although the interviews don't visually represent the project, they actually did. During the conversation, you can actually know a lot more about the intents of the curators. In terms of languages, that's a big problem. I mean, this project is in 2 languages, English and Italian, and it was very complex to just keep on doing all of like the translations. And if we think about all of the other languages, it's even more complex. And then there's again the problem of sustainability. I mean, even if it's a small project, it will require maintenance and being updated in order to be alive. So it's quite complex. But yeah, the idea was to try to create like a small ecosystem with different kind of information or different ways of accessing information about projects.
I mean, maybe to briefly add to that, I think, I mean, that's also for me is always one of the dilemmas, right? And on the one hand, you'd like to preserve everything, but on the other hand, I feel more and more strongly also to actually move from the idea of like, well, you know, we have to accept that we can't, you know, we can't preserve these things, and so we have to find other ways to also remember these things. And I do think it's important to build a history, but not necessarily in the way that we've become accustomed to. And I think what is indeed interesting, what Rebecca also mentioned, and how indeed you can look for different ways. And sometimes it's okay to forget something and have other people remember it, but also indeed to look for documentation that is completely different. You know, it's like storytelling. You come up with a story and that's what you tell, and that's how something also survives in a way. And yeah, it's then too bad that not everyone can see or experience it anymore, but it also has another additional value to it, I think, in which you make it more relevant for the contemporary context in which you present it. So it's more perhaps in that sense, not so much about the past, but much more about the present and then how you make these translations.
I see we have a hand raised. Marlo.
Yeah, I had another question about field broadcast, if that's okay. Yeah. Because Rebecca Birch, she spoke a bit about this web application that it stopped because it wasn't allowed according to the rules of the web browser, and I was wondering if she could speak a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so basically, I guess we had, I mean, what we made effectively with field broadcast was what people might call malware. So it was a pop-up that does something that, you know, it's what you want to block now. When you go on a website, it's, you know, blocking pop-ups, blocking things that happen that get in your way as a user from using your own desktop space. So obviously, developers of browsers, no, not browsers, that's not the first projects were outside of a browser, but software system developers want to enable people to use they want the operating system to work smoothly. They don't want people to be disrupted. They also want people to do things in the way that they direct them. You know, Apple, for example, packaging, they want you to do everything within Apple. They want you to use iTunes. They don't want you to look elsewhere. They don't want to allow other developers in. So these systems are more and more kind of closed and proprietary, if you like. So it essentially, yeah, and as Rob was explaining, so now exactly the software, the kind of technology that we used was what became a kind of push notification. So now any push notifications so something's coming in, do you want to engage with it or not? So once we built it for the phone and tablet, we couldn't, you know, on a phone, because everything lives within an app, it couldn't just operate kind of and open on top of your whatever else you were doing. You had to agree that you wanted to allow it to open. So it was like a field broadcast is arriving. Do you want to watch it? Yes or no? So, and now effectively any, like both Mac and Microsoft operating systems work like that on a computer. So you can't, we literally can't do it anymore in the same way. But we could do it a little bit in the browsers, but now we probably can't do it in the browsers either. Does that explain it? I don't think Rob's
yeah.
technologist, but yeah.
Certainly. That answered my question, yes, thank you.
Thanks.
I see Gaia with her hand raised.
Yeah, well, I had a question about kind of circulation also of the project, curating online in a sense. I mean, I was struck by Annette's beautiful screenshots of the book widely being posted and reposted online, and also made me think of gallery delivery and the importance of that translation onto the space of social media, or what was happening, with the exhibition at home. And I wonder if you thought about what to do with this research. I mean, I recognize the archive you are building. It's quite a resource in itself. But have you thought about other ways of disseminating the research, perhaps, or more kind of easy to consume and digest in a sense? Is that something that interests you, or you need to think about it, or not interested at all?
I mean, potentially I would be interested, but I'm also very bad at social media. So, I mean, I also understand that, for example, the interviews would have been much more digestible if they were edited to be consumed, for example, online on social media with shorter sentences, etc., which I did in other instances of other, maybe more curatorial projects that are curated or books. But having said that, I think the idea is, to continue slowly this research, and maybe also to involve other people or students who would like to be part of it in the research. I have no idea about how to make it more digestible, because that's not one of my greatest skills, but I'm open to suggestions. Yeah,
I was showing the website to some of my students, and they were all very interested, but all of a sudden they said, oh, but there are no images on this, which is not true in a sense, but there is a sense of, very kind of, it's very thorough and text-based.
Yeah, it's text heavy, and I mean, that was a choice. Yeah, which is, it's not because I don't want to make it more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because, I don't know, I think it's good to spend time with things when you are doing research. You can just take in little doses. In terms of, I don't know, reaching other people, I mean, there were like 3 events in the course of this year. I mean, you were always involved, Gaia, so, but maybe for people who are here, there was one in India, so we tried to reach it, because I used to live there, used to live in Bangalore, to reach audiences there and have speakers from there. There was one in Italy, and now there's one in the UK. So I hope somehow to be able to continue to do it. But also, I have to say that all of this happened also for the generosity of people that I know, collaborators, people that I interviewed who dedicated their time to it. So I do consider it as a collaborative effort, difficult to digest.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't trying to say that, but I mean, for sure, there is a sense of, in Italy, for instance, it was very necessary. Like, there was really like kind of void. There was, there needed to be a field with a project like this. I think it's great that you put all this energy into collating the interviews and the material. And so, yeah, I think looking forward to next developments.
Thank you. So I guess this is all for today. And I always find it very difficult, sorry, being online. to even say goodbye. Well, I have to thank you, everyone, of course. James Schofield, who's been helping us all the way through with like Zoom, letting people in, comments, posting things, setting up the event. So thank you very much. Thank you for all of the speakers for being here with us and presenting your projects. And thank you to the other people that joined with your questions.